The wedding night was supposed to seal her fate, but instead, it ignited a war. Eliza Whitmore stood alone in the grand bedchamber of Blackthorn Manor, her husband's words still ringing in her ears like the toll of a funeral bell. Do not mistake this arrangement for anything resembling affection. You are here to provide an heir and manage my household, nothing more. But the Duke of Blackthorn had made a fatal miscalculation. He had married a woman with nothing left to lose, and everything to prove. Stay until the end to see how a discarded bride conquered an empire. Like and comment with your city. The September rain fell like bullets against the windows of Whitmore House, each drop a reminder of debts unpaid and futures slipping away. Eliza stood in her father's study, watching him sign away her life with a trembling hand. "It's done," Harold Whitmore said, his voice hollow. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He hadn't met her eyes in weeks, not since the creditors had come knocking with their ledgers and their barely concealed contempt. "The Duke has agreed to the match. The wedding will be in 3 weeks." Eliza didn't flinch. She had known this moment was coming since the night she'd overheard her father weeping in the dark, listing their debts like sins at confession. The Whitmore name, once respected throughout the county, had been gutted by her brother's gambling and her father's poor investments. They were drowning, and Eliza was the only thing of value left to sell. "What are the terms?" she asked, her voice steady despite the ice spreading through her chest. Her father finally looked up, and she saw something worse than shame in his eyes. Relief. "He'll assume all debts immediately. Your mother and I will retain the house and a modest income for life. Your sisters will have dowries, small ones, but enough. And what does he get in return? A wife, an heir, a capable woman to manage his estates." Harold's fingers drummed against the desk, a nervous habit he'd developed in recent months. "The Duke is a practical man, Eliza. He's not looking for romance. He needs someone competent, discreet, and desperate enough not to refuse," Eliza finished. She moved to the window, pressing her palm against the cold glass. "Did he ask to meet me first?" "He saw you at the Haversham ball last spring. That was sufficient." She remembered that ball. She'd worn her mother's altered gown and spent the evening standing near the refreshment table, watching prettier, wealthier girls spin across the floor like jeweled tops. She'd been 26 then, already well past the age when most women of her class were married and managing nurseries. She had long ago accepted that marriage wasn't in her future. How wrong she'd been. "What's he like?" she asked, though she already knew the stories. Everyone in 3 counties knew about Rowan Blackthorn, the Duke who'd inherited his title at 19 and transformed his lands through sheer force of will and iron discipline. He was 40 now, never married, rarely seen in society. Some called him brilliant. Others called him cold as winter stone. "Exacting," her father said carefully, "but fair by all accounts. He manages 10,000 acres, 3 villages, and more tenants than I can count. He needs someone who can handle that kind of responsibility." "Because his previous attempts failed?" Her father's silence was answer enough. 3 weeks later, Eliza stood in the stone chapel at Blackthorn Manor, listening to a vicar she'd never met recite vows that felt like a verdict. The chapel was cold despite the October sun, its walls thick enough to muffle the sound of the wind that howled across the moors beyond. The Duke stood beside her like a carved monument. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair threaded with silver at the temples and eyes the color of winter sky. His face was handsome in a harsh, unforgiving way, all sharp angles and firm lines, with a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. He wore black, as if he were attending a funeral rather than a wedding. Perhaps he was. "Do you, Eliza Catherine Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" The chapel held perhaps 20 people, her parents, pale and anxious, her sisters, crying softly, a handful of the Duke's staff and tenants, their faces carefully neutral, and at the back, a dark-haired woman with the Duke's same sharp features, watching everything with eyes like a hawk. "I do," Eliza said, her voice carrying through the cold space. The Duke's response was equally measured, equally empty of feeling. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, heavy gold set with a blood-red garnet, his hands were steady. Hers trembled slightly, though she willed them still. "You may kiss the bride." The Duke turned to her, and for a moment something flickered in those winter eyes. Then it was gone. He leaned down, pressed his lips to hers in a kiss as brief and cold as a judge's gavel, and stepped back. "It's done," he said quietly, and she couldn't tell if he was speaking to her or to himself. The wedding breakfast was a strained affair held in Blackthorn Manor's great dining hall. The room was magnificent, vaulted ceilings, mullioned windows overlooking the estate, a table that could seat 40. But the grandeur only emphasized how few of them there were, how much empty space surrounded their small gathering. Eliza sat at the Duke's right hand, picking at food she couldn't taste, while conversations ebbed and flowed around her like water around a stone. Her new husband barely spoke. He acknowledged toasts with curt nods, answered questions in monosyllables, and ignored her completely. The dark-haired woman from the chapel, introduced as Lady Catherine Blackthorn, the Duke's sister, watched them both with unconcealed interest. "You're quieter than the others," Catherine said suddenly, leaning across the table toward Eliza. "That's refreshing." The last one wouldn't stop chattering about her favorite fabrics and the season's most fashionable colors. "Catherine," the Duke said, his voice carrying a warning. "What?" "It's true." And the one before that spent the entire breakfast weeping into her napkin. Catherine smiled, but there was something sharp in it. "At least this one has some steel in her spine. You can see it in how she holds herself." Eliza met Catherine's gaze steadily. "I don't see the point in weeping over things that can't be changed." "See?" Catherine gestured at her brother with her wineglass. "Steel, I told you to listen to me for once." "That will do," the Duke said, setting down his fork with enough force to make the china rattle. "Eliza, I trust you're prepared to assume your responsibilities immediately. Mrs. Granger, the housekeeper, will provide you with a complete inventory of the household. I expect you to familiarize yourself with it by week's end." It wasn't a question or a request. It was a command. "Of course," Eliza said evenly. "Good. I'll be departing for the northern estates tomorrow morning. I'll return in a fortnight. That should give you sufficient time to orient yourself." He was leaving. On the day after their wedding, he was leaving. Catherine laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Subtle as ever, Rowan." "I have responsibilities," he said coldly. "The northern tenants have been waiting 3 weeks for this inspection. I won't delay further for your wedding," Catherine finished. "For your wife. Heaven forbid you might want to spend more than 12 hours with the woman you just married." The Duke's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. The rest of the table had gone silent, everyone suddenly fascinated by their plates. Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice calm. "I'm sure the tenants' needs are pressing. I'll have plenty to occupy myself in your absence." It was the right thing to say, dutiful, accommodating, exactly what a practical wife should offer. But the Duke's eyes, when they finally met hers, held something she couldn't quite read. Surprise, perhaps, or suspicion. By evening, Eliza's family had departed, her mother's last embrace fierce and desperate. "Write to us," she'd whispered. "Please, write." Now Eliza stood alone in the Duchess's chambers, a suite of rooms that sprawled across the manor's east wing. The bedroom was enormous, dominated by a 4-poster bed draped in deep blue velvet. Connected to it were a dressing room, a private sitting room with a view of the gardens, and a small study lined with empty bookshelves. Everything was immaculate and utterly impersonal, as if no one had ever actually lived here. A soft knock interrupted her inspection. "Your Grace?" An older woman in a crisp black dress stood in the doorway. "I'm Mrs. Granger, the housekeeper. His Grace asked me to attend you this evening." "Come in, please." Eliza gestured to the chairs by the fireplace. "I'd like to learn as much as possible before he returns." Mrs. Granger's eyebrows rose slightly, but she entered and took a seat. "Most new brides prefer to rest after the journey." "I'm not most new brides," Eliza said simply. "And I suspect His Grace wouldn't appreciate a wife who needs coddling." A ghost of a smile crossed the housekeeper's face. "No, Your Grace, he would not." She folded her hands in her lap. "What would you like to know?" "Everything." For the next 2 hours, Mrs. Granger painted a picture of Blackthorn Manor that both impressed and overwhelmed. The main house had 47 rooms, employed a staff of 32, and required constant maintenance. Beyond it lay the home farm, 3 separate tenant villages, a massive conservatory that had once been famous throughout the county, extensive gardens, and thousands of acres of farmland, woodland, and more. The Duke manages the land and the tenants himself, Mrs. Granger explained. He's very particular about it. Every decision flows through him: crop rotations, repairs, disputes, everything. He meets with his estate manager every morning at 6. That sounds exhausting. It is, but he's never trusted anyone else to do it right. The housekeeper's expression grew cautious. The house, however, that's been neglected. His Grace focuses on what produces income. The manor itself, the gardens, the conservatory, those have been allowed to decline. Show me, Eliza said, rising. Mrs. Granger led her through a maze of corridors, each more faded than the last. Paint peeled in the upper hallways. Several rooms were shut up, furniture covered with dust cloths. When they reached the conservatory, a massive glass structure attached to the manor's south wing, Eliza stopped in the doorway, shocked. It must have been magnificent once. The glass dome soared 40 feet overhead, and the space was large enough to hold a dozen trees. But now, half the panes were cracked or missing entirely. Dead plants filled the beds, their skeletal remains brown and brittle. Weeds pushed through broken tiles, and the air smelled of rot and abandonment. What happened? Eliza breathed. The late Duke, His Grace's father, built this for his wife. She loved plants, exotic things from all over the world. But she died 20 years ago, and the old Duke, well, he lost interest. Young Rowan tried to maintain it for a while, but after his father died and he inherited, there were so many other pressing matters. Mrs. Granger sighed. He sealed it off about 5 years ago, said it was a waste of resources. Eliza walked into the conservatory, her footsteps echoing on the broken tiles. Through the damaged glass, moonlight streamed in shafts of silver, illuminating the destruction. But underneath the death and neglect, she could see the bones of something beautiful. The layout was brilliant, designed to create microclimates for different species. The irrigation system, though broken, had been ingenious for its time. This could be saved, she said softly. Your Grace, with respect, it would take years and a fortune to... But it could be saved. Eliza turned to face the housekeeper. Couldn't it? Mrs. Granger studied her for a long moment. Perhaps, if someone cared enough to try. They continued the tour through the gardens, which were in better shape than the conservatory, but still clearly neglected. Overgrown paths, uncontrolled growth, once precise hedges grown wild. Here, too, Eliza saw potential buried under years of indifference. It was after midnight when they returned to the main house. Mrs. Granger paused at the door to Eliza's chambers. Your Grace, there's one more thing you should know about tonight. Eliza's stomach tightened. Yes? His Grace. The housekeeper chose her words carefully. He maintains separate chambers in the West Wing. He typically spends his evenings working in his study until quite late. He doesn't... That is, he won't. He won't be joining me, Eliza finished, surprised by the relief that flooded through her. I understand. Mrs. Granger looked uncomfortable. It's not my place to say, but the previous situations, they didn't end well. His Grace has very specific expectations, and when they weren't met, he became disappointed. I believe he's decided it's simpler to keep his distance. Previous situations? Eliza asked sharply. How many women has he brought here? You're the first he actually married, Mrs. Granger said carefully. But there were 2 others before you. Arrangements were discussed, contracts drawn up. Neither made it past the first month. What happened to them? They left. Or more accurately, he sent them away. They couldn't manage the household to his standards, couldn't handle the isolation, couldn't... She trailed off. Couldn't accept that this was a business arrangement, not a love match. Eliza absorbed this in silence. So she was the 3rd attempt, and the only one desperate enough to actually go through with the marriage. The only one whose family's situation was dire enough that breaking the engagement wasn't an option. Thank you for your honesty, she said finally. Your Grace? Mrs. Granger hesitated at the door. For what it's worth, I think you might last longer than the others. You seem practical. After the housekeeper left, Eliza prepared for bed alone. The lady's maid, who appeared to help her undress, was quiet and efficient, revealing nothing through expression or word. When she finally left, Eliza stood at the window in her nightdress, looking out over the moonlit estate. Somewhere in this vast house, her husband was working in his study, reviewing ledgers or writing letters, treating his wedding night like any other evening. The bed behind her, that enormous four-poster bed, would remain pristine and untouched. She should feel humiliated, insulted. Any normal bride would be devastated by such rejection. Instead, Eliza felt something unexpected: determination. The Duke of Blackthorn had made his position clear. This was a transaction. He'd purchased a solution to his household problems and a potential heir, and he'd done so with the same cold calculation he'd used to buy a broodmare. Fine. She'd been purchased. But he was about to learn that Eliza Blackthorn, was a far better investment than he'd anticipated. The sound of a door opening made her turn. For a moment, her heart jumped, but it wasn't the Duke. Instead, Lady Catherine stood in the doorway, still fully dressed, a bottle of wine in one hand and 2 glasses in the other. "I thought you might need this," she said, sweeping into the room without invitation. "The first night alone is always the worst." "Did you come alone on your first night?" Eliza asked, too tired for pretense. Catherine laughed as she poured the wine. "I've never married, and at 38 I never will, but I remember my mother's wedding night to my father. She spent it weeping in this very room while he drank himself unconscious in the billiard room. So, yes, I understand what it's like to be part of a Blackthorn marriage." She handed Eliza a glass and raised her own. "To practical arrangements and low expectations." Eliza clinked her glass against Catherine's and drank. The wine was excellent, rich and warming, spreading heat through her chest. "Why are you here?" Eliza asked. "The truth." Catherine settled into one of the chairs by the cold fireplace, gesturing for Eliza to join her. "Because my brother is a brilliant fool, and I'm curious to see if you're the one who finally makes him see it." "I don't understand." "No, I don't suppose you would yet." Catherine swirled the wine in her glass. "Tell me, what do you know about my brother? Really know, not just the stories people tell." Eliza considered. "He inherited young. He's built the estate into one of the most profitable in England. He's exacting, disciplined, and doesn't suffer fools. And he apparently has no interest in a real marriage." "All true, as far as it goes." Catherine leaned forward. "But here's what you don't know. Rowan was 19 when our father died and left him with an estate on the brink of bankruptcy, a mother dying of grief, and me, a 15-year-old girl who'd just been told her marriage prospects had evaporated along with her dowry. I didn't know it was that bad. No one did. My father was very good at maintaining appearances, right up until the day he shot himself in his study." Eliza's breath caught. "I'm sorry." Catherine waved a hand dismissively. "It was 21 years ago. But Rowan found him. Did you know that? He was the one who cleaned up the mess, paid off the servants to keep it quiet, told everyone it was a hunting accident. He was 19 years old and he had to become a man in a single afternoon." She refilled both their glasses. "For the next 5 years, he worked like a demon. Rebuilt the finances, reformed the estate management, dragged us back from the edge of ruin through sheer force of will. He had no help, no guidance, just 1,000 people depending on him and the weight of a duchy on his shoulders. By the time he was 25, the estate was thriving. By 30, he was richer than our father ever was." "But," Eliza prompted, sensing there was more. "But somewhere in all that, he forgot how to be human. He learned to see everything as a problem to be solved, a system to be optimized, including people." Catherine's eyes were sad. "He tried courting once, when he was 28. Beautiful girl, daughter of an earl, exactly the kind of match everyone expected. She lasted 3 months before she fled back to London, crying that he treated her like an employee rather than a fiancée. Hence the practical arrangements." "Exactly. He decided if marriage was necessary, and for an heir, it is, then it should be handled practically. No messy emotions, no disappointed expectations, just a clear exchange of value." Catherine studied Eliza over the rim of her glass. "But here's what my brilliant, foolish brother doesn't understand. You can't actually live that way. You can try, you can build all the walls you want, but eventually something breaks through, or someone." "You think I'm going to break through his walls?" Eliza almost laughed. "I haven't even had a real conversation with him yet." I think you're different from the others. They wanted romance, affection, all the things Rowan couldn't give them. But you, Catherine tilted her head, considering. You want something else, don't you? I can see it in the way you looked at this place tonight. You're already planning something. Eliza was silent for a moment, then decided there was no point in hiding it. The conservatory, the gardens, this entire manor is magnificent, but it's dying. Your brother is so focused on the lands and the accounts that he's let the heart of his home rot. And you think you can fix it? I think I can try. Eliza met Catherine's eyes. I'm here because my family was desperate. I have no illusions about that. But I'm also here now, with no way out and nothing to go back to. So I have a choice. I can sit in these beautiful rooms and wither away like those plants in the conservatory, or I can find a way to make this life mean something. Catherine smiled slowly. I knew I was going to like you. She stood, smoothing her skirts. A word of advice from one woman who's watched too many marriages crumble in this house. Don't try to change him. Rowan is who he is, and he's never responded well to frontal assaults. But he does respond to results. Show him what you can do, prove your value in his language, efficiency, productivity, tangible improvements, and you might surprise yourself with how much ground you can gain. And if that doesn't work, then at least you'll have saved something beautiful from dying completely. Catherine moved to the door, then paused. Oh, and Eliza? He'll be gone before dawn tomorrow. He always runs when things get too close to his heart, but he always comes back eventually, and when he does, make sure there's something here worth coming back to. After Catherine left, Eliza finished her wine and climbed into the enormous bed alone. The sheets were cold, the room too quiet, and somewhere in another wing, her husband was preparing to flee at first light. But as she drifted towards sleep, Eliza's mind was already racing with plans. The conservatory, the gardens, the household accounts. The inventory Mrs. Granger had mentioned. She had 2 weeks before the Duke returned. 2 weeks to prove that he hadn't just purchased a wife. He'd invested in a partner, even if he didn't know it yet. Dawn came cold and gray. Eliza woke to the sound of horses on the drive below her window. She rushed to look out and saw the Duke mounting a massive black gelding, dressed for travel in a heavy coat and boots. He didn't look up at the house, didn't pause or hesitate. Within moments, he and 2 men she assumed were servants or guards were riding down the long drive toward the main road. Running, just as Catherine had predicted. Eliza watched until they disappeared into the morning mist. Then she rang for her maid, dressed in her most practical gown, and prepared for battle. Mrs. Granger appeared at 8 o'clock sharp with the household inventory as promised. It was a massive leather-bound ledger, entries dating back 20 years filled with cramped handwriting and crossed-out corrections. His Grace is very particular about the household accounts, Mrs. Granger said, setting the heavy book on the desk in Eliza's sitting room. Every expense must be justified and recorded. The previous arrangements had difficulty with this level of detail. I kept my father's books for 5 years, Eliza said, already flipping through the pages. I'm familiar with accounts. She spent the morning studying the ledger, and what she found both impressed and appalled her. The Duke's record-keeping was meticulous to the point of obsession. Every candle, every pound of flour, every yard of fabric was tracked and categorized. She could trace seasonal patterns, identify waste, even see where certain suppliers had been replaced when their quality declined. But she also saw the gaps. Whole categories of expense had been slashed or eliminated entirely. Garden maintenance, conservatory upkeep, decorative improvements, anything that didn't directly contribute to the estate's income or the basic functioning of the household. It was brilliant financial management. It was also slowly strangling the life out of the manor. Mrs. Granger, Eliza called out. The housekeeper appeared in the doorway. I'd like to tour the entire house today. Every room, every space, including the areas that are shut up. And I want to meet with the key staff, the cook, the head gardener, whoever manages the conservatory now. The conservatory hasn't had a dedicated manager in 5 years, Your Grace. Then whoever has the keys. And Mrs. Granger? Eliza looked up from the ledger. I want complete honesty. If something is broken, I want to know. If systems aren't working, I want to know. If the staff has concerns or suggestions, I want to know. Can you arrange that? The housekeeper's expression was carefully neutral. His Grace prefers that household matters be filtered through me or the steward. He doesn't want to be bothered with details. I'm not asking to bother His Grace. I'm asking you to help me understand what needs to be done. Eliza stood, closing the ledger. You told me last night that this house has been neglected. Show me exactly how badly. For a moment, Mrs. Granger hesitated. Then something shifted in her expression. A decision made. Very well, Your Grace. Give me an hour to assemble the staff. The tour took most of the day, and with each hour, Eliza's understanding of the challenge before her deepened. The house was magnificent in its bones. High ceilings, elegant proportions, beautiful architectural details. But everywhere she looked, she saw deferred maintenance and abandoned beauty. In the upper floors, an entire wing stood empty, its furniture covered, its fireplaces cold. The family quarters, Mrs. Granger explained. His Grace uses only his bedroom and his study. He saw no point in heating and maintaining rooms no one uses. The servants' quarters were cramped and shabby, clearly an afterthought to the Duke's efficiency measures. We've lost 3 good maids this year, confided Mrs. Bright, the head cook. They went to houses where they had proper beds and more than 1 day off a month. The gardens, viewed in full daylight, revealed themselves as a battlefield between nature and neglect. William, the elderly head gardener, showed her what remained of once elaborate formal gardens with barely controlled grief. The late Duchess, His Grace's mother, she had vision, he said, gesturing at overgrown parterres. These gardens won prizes, Your Grace. People came from London just to walk through them, but after she died, he shrugged. The young Duke, he tried for a while, even designed some sections himself. He's got an eye for it, though he'd never admit it now. But then the old Duke died, and everything changed. No time for beauty, he said, only production. But it was the conservatory that truly broke Eliza's heart. In daylight, the destruction was even more apparent. She could identify the ghosts of what had grown here, exotic palms, delicate ferns, flowering vines that must have been stunning. The irrigation system, now broken and dry, had been ingenious for its time, using gravity and clever piping to water different zones. Young Rowan built that, William said quietly, following her gaze. He was 16, 17 maybe. Did it for his mother. Spent a whole summer working out the mathematics, testing different designs. Broke his heart when she died before she could see it finished. Eliza ran her hand along the rusted pipes. It could still work. Aye, with money and time and someone who cares enough to invest both. That night, Eliza sat in her study, surrounded by pages of notes and calculations. She'd assessed the situation, identified the problems, and now she was forming a plan. The conservatory would be first. It was contained, manageable, and symbolic. If she could restore it, she could prove her capability in a language the Duke would understand. Efficient use of resources, measurable improvement, tangible results. But it would take money, and every penny of the household budget was already allocated under the Duke's watchful eye. She'd have to find another way. The next morning, Eliza called a meeting with Mrs. Granger, Mrs. Bright, William, and Thomas the estate steward. They gathered in her sitting room, clearly uncomfortable with the summons. I want to restore the conservatory, Eliza began without preamble. But I can't do it using the household budget without His Grace's approval, and he's made his position on such expenses clear. So I need to find creative solutions. The staff exchanged glances. Thomas, a practical man in his 50s, spoke first. Your Grace, with respect, the conservatory would require hundreds of pounds just to repair the glass, not to mention plants, soil, tools. I'm aware, but what if we could source materials more creatively? William, you mentioned the old Duke maintained extensive gardens. Where did all those materials go when they were dismantled? The gardener's eyes widened. The sheds, Your Grace, behind the east wall. We couldn't bear to throw it all away, so we stored it. Tools, pots, even some glass panes we salvaged when we sealed up the orangery. Show me. The sheds were a revelation. Decades of accumulated materials filled 3 large outbuildings. Not just gardening supplies, but furniture, decorations, even crates of unopened items ordered by previous dukes and never used. It was a treasure trove of abandoned potential. This is what we'll work with, Eliza said, already making mental calculations. William, Go through everything related to the gardens and the conservatory. Make lists of what we have and what we still need. Mrs. Granger, I noticed several servants in the household who seem underemployed. Could they be reassigned to help with restoration work? His Grace prefers we maintain full staff in case of need, the housekeeper said carefully. Then we'll work on their days off, and I'll pay them extra from my personal funds. Eliza turned to the steward. Thomas, I need you to be honest with me. Is there any flexible money in the estate accounts? Anything that wouldn't be noticed if it were redirected? Thomas looked deeply uncomfortable. Your Grace, every account is audited by His Grace personally. There's no slack in the system. Then we'll create our own system. The conservatory once grew exotic plants. If we restore it, could we sell cuttings, produce? For the first time, she saw interest flicker in the steward's eyes. Possibly. There's a market for exotic plants among the wealthy. If we could produce quality specimens, then we fund the restoration through future profits. We start small, invest carefully, and build up. But I need your help, all of you, to make it work without disrupting the Duke's careful systems. She looked at each of them in turn. Can you do that? Mrs. Granger spoke first. Your Grace, if His Grace finds out you've been moving resources around without his approval, then I'll take full responsibility. But in 2 weeks when he returns, I want to show him results, not ask for permission. I want to prove that I can manage not just the household as it is, but make it better. Will you help me? Silence fell. Then William spoke, his voice gruff. The young Duke, he used to care about beauty before everything happened. Maybe it's time someone reminded him what this place used to be. One by one, the others nodded. Good, Eliza said. Then we start tomorrow. Mrs. Granger, I'll need a full accounting of servant availability. William, begin inventorying the sheds. Thomas, help me understand the current plant market. We have 2 weeks to prove this estate can be more than just profitable. It can be magnificent again. As the meeting broke up, Mrs. Granger lingered. Your Grace, the previous arrangements, they tried to change His Grace himself. You're trying to change the estate. I'm trying to show him what's possible, Eliza corrected. Whether he chooses to see it is up to him. The next 2 weeks became a blur of relentless work. Eliza rose before dawn and worked until well after dark, driving herself and everyone around her with quiet, unshakable determination. In the conservatory, they started with structural repairs. Using salvaged glass and materials from the sheds, William and a team of servants began replacing broken panes, patching the frame, clearing the debris. The irrigation system, after 2 days of patient work, sputtered back to life. Eliza worked alongside them, her fine dresses abandoned in favor of practical work clothes. She hauled buckets, sorted through decades of accumulated dirt, learned to identify and repair the delicate pipe joints of the irrigation system. Her hands blistered, then calloused. Her back ached. She'd never been so tired in her life. She'd also never felt more alive. You shouldn't be doing this, Your Grace, Mrs. Granger protested on the 3rd day, finding Eliza on her knees scrubbing tiles. You're the Duchess. This is servants' work. I'm asking them to believe in something, Eliza said, sitting back on her heels. I can't do that from a comfortable distance. Besides, I like this work. It has clear results. You can see progress. And there was progress. By the end of the first week, the conservatory was structurally sound and clean. William had propagated cuttings from the few surviving plants hidden in corners and had sent to London for seeds of hardy exotic species. The space was still empty, still waiting, but it was no longer dying. In the main house, Eliza implemented similar changes with surgical precision. She reorganized work schedules to eliminate redundant tasks, giving servants more time off without reducing efficiency. She negotiated better prices with suppliers by consolidating orders and leveraging the estate's reputation. She found a dozen small ways to improve life for the staff without increasing costs, mostly by actually listening to their suggestions. The previous arrangements never asked our opinion, Mrs. Bright confided one evening over tea. They gave orders based on what ladies in London did, whether it made sense here or not. You actually want to know what works. The gardens came next. Working with William, Eliza prioritized ruthlessly. They couldn't restore everything. That would take years and money they didn't have. but they could save the most important areas and let the rest naturalize gracefully. The formal parterre nearest the house was cleared and replanted with hardy perennials. The overgrown hedges were trimmed back into clean lines. Every decision was documented, every expense justified, every improvement measured. Eliza kept meticulous records, knowing the Duke would demand nothing less. On the 10th day, Lady Catherine appeared at the conservatory, picking her way through the work site in impractical shoes and an amused expression. "My brother is going to have an apoplexy," she said cheerfully, watching servants install repaired glass panels. "Or he'll appreciate that I've improved the property without requiring any budget increase," Eliza countered, not looking up from the irrigation valve she was adjusting. "Eliza, you're filthy." "I'm working," Catherine laughed. "Yes, you are. The staff can't stop talking about it. Do you know what they call you below stairs? The Duchess who gets her hands dirty. They mean it as a compliment. I don't care what they call me as long as they're willing to work with me." Eliza finally looked up, wiping sweat from her forehead and probably smearing more dirt across it. "Did you come here just to mock me, or was there a purpose?" "Both." Catherine stepped carefully around a pile of salvaged materials. "But also to warn you. Rowan sent word. He's returning tomorrow, a day early. Apparently the northern inspection went faster than expected." Eliza's stomach dropped. They weren't ready. The conservatory was functional but still mostly empty. The gardens were half finished. She'd planned to have everything complete, perfect, before he saw it. "Don't panic," Catherine said, reading her expression. "He's already seen failure twice before. Anything better than that will be a pleasant surprise." But Eliza wasn't aiming for pleasant surprise. She was aiming to prove her worth so completely that the Duke would have no choice but to acknowledge it. She had one day left. That night, she didn't sleep. Instead, she worked through the darkness alongside William and anyone else willing to help, planting the newly arrived specimens in the conservatory, arranging them to best advantage, making sure every detail was as perfect as time allowed. By dawn, her hands were bleeding and her legs trembled with exhaustion, but the conservatory was transformed. It wasn't full, not like it must have been in its glory days, but it was alive again. Young palms stretched toward the repaired glass, ferns unfurled in the filtered light. Flowering vines had been trained up the support columns. The irrigation system hummed quietly, misting the air with moisture. It smelled of earth and green growing things instead of rot and death. "It's beautiful, Your Grace," William said softly, standing beside her in the early morning light. The young Duke's mother would have loved this. Eliza was too tired to respond. She simply stood there, swaying slightly, looking at what they'd accomplished in 11 days of relentless work. Then she heard it, the sound of horses on the drive. He was early, earlier than even Catherine had warned. Eliza looked down at herself, filthy dress, dirt under her fingernails, hair falling from its pins, exhausted beyond measure. This wasn't how she'd planned to greet her returning husband. She'd imagined being calm, composed, ready to present her accomplishments with cool confidence. Instead, she looked like a scullery maid who'd lost a fight with a garden. "Go," William urged. "Clean up. I'll make sure everything here is ready." But Eliza found she couldn't move. She'd worked herself into the ground for nearly 2 weeks, transforming what she could of his neglected estate, and she was suddenly terrified it wouldn't be enough. That he'd see only the presumption of a wife reorganizing his holdings without permission, rather than the love and labor she'd poured into saving something beautiful. The sound of footsteps on gravel grew closer. Eliza forced herself to straighten, to at least try to look dignified despite her disheveled state. The Duke of Blackthorn appeared in the conservatory doorway. He stopped. For a long moment, he simply stood there, taking in the space, the repaired glass gleaming in the morning light, the living plants where there had been only death, the sound of running water instead of silence, and in the center of it all, his wife, exhausted and filthy and absolutely refusing to back down. His expression was unreadable. Those winter blue eyes moved from the plants to the irrigation system to the spotless tiles, cataloging every change, every improvement. Then his gaze settled on Eliza. "What?" he said slowly, his voice carefully controlled. "Have you done?" Eliza's hands were still trembling from exhaustion, but she kept her chin high. The Duke stood in the conservatory doorway like a figure carved from granite, his expression offering nothing, Not approval, not anger, just that terrible, assessing silence. I asked you a question, he said, stepping into the space. His boots clicked against the newly cleaned tiles as he moved deeper into the conservatory, his eyes tracking every detail with the precision of an auditor reviewing suspect accounts. What have you done to my property? I restored it, Eliza said simply, using salvaged materials from the storage sheds, redirected labor from underutilized staff, and without my permission. You left me in charge of the household. This is part of the household. He gestured sharply at the plants, the repaired glass, the working irrigation system. This is a waste of resources. I closed this structure 5 years ago because it served no productive purpose. It serves a purpose now. Eliza moved to one of the plant beds, resting her hand on the edge. Her fingers left smudges of dirt on the clean stone, but she didn't care. William estimates we can begin selling exotic plant cuttings within 3 months. There's a substantial market among wealthy collectors. Within a year, this conservatory could generate enough income to pay for its own maintenance and contribute to the estate's profits. The Duke's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You've been here less than 2 weeks, and you think you understand the economics of this estate better than I do? I think I understand potential when I see it. Eliza's exhaustion was making her bold, stripping away the careful deference she'd planned to show him. You've built an extraordinary machine here, efficient, productive, profitable. But you've done it by cutting away everything that doesn't immediately contribute to the bottom line. This conservatory, the gardens, even basic improvements to servant quarters, all deemed wasteful. Because they are wasteful. No, Eliza said quietly. They're investments you chose not to make. There's a difference. For a moment, something flickered in those winter eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or calculation. He moved closer, examining the irrigation system with the focus of a man who understood engineering. This is my design from when I was 17. William told me. He said you built it for your mother. The Duke's expression closed like a door slamming shut. William talks too much. He straightened, brushing dust from his sleeve with sharp, precise movements. I want a full accounting of every penny spent, every hour of labor used, every resource allocated, on my desk by tomorrow morning. It's already prepared. Mrs. Granger has the documentation. That stopped him. He turned to face her fully, and for the first time she saw something other than cold control in his expression. It might have been grudging respect, or it might have been irritation that she'd anticipated his demands. With the Duke, it was impossible to tell. You've been busy, he said. You hired me to manage your household. I'm managing it. I hired you to maintain order, not to reorganize my estate according to your own vision. Then you should have been clearer about the limits of my authority. Eliza was too tired to watch her words anymore. Or perhaps you should have stayed to actually explain what you expected, instead of fleeing to the northern estates before dawn on the day after our wedding. The air between them crackled with tension. Somewhere in the conservatory, water dripped from the irrigation system, a soft counterpoint to the heavy silence. I had responsibilities, the Duke said, his voice dangerously quiet. So did I. And unlike you, I didn't run from them. His eyes narrowed. You forget yourself, madam. No, Your Grace. For the first time in my life, I'm remembering exactly who I am. Eliza's legs were shaking now, but she refused to sit, refused to show any weakness. I'm the woman desperate enough to marry you for security, practical enough to accept a loveless arrangement, and apparently foolish enough to think I could make something meaningful out of this wasteland you call a marriage. You knew the terms. I knew the terms, Eliza cut him off. A business arrangement, an heir, and a competent household manager. No affection, no expectations beyond practical utility. But what you didn't tell me, what you couldn't have known, is that I'm incapable of doing anything halfway. You wanted competent? I'll give you exceptional. You wanted practical? I'll give you profitable. You wanted someone to maintain your precious order? I'll improve it beyond anything you imagined. She took a step toward him, and to her savage satisfaction, he actually stepped back. But here's what you need to understand, Your Grace. I didn't do this for your approval. I did it because I refused to live in a mausoleum. I did it because I saw something beautiful dying, and I couldn't let it die. I did it because in 2 weeks of working alongside your staff, I've learned more about what this estate could be than you've seen in 20 years of treating it like a ledger to be balanced." The Duke stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. "You dare—" "Yes, I dare. What exactly are you going to do? Send me away like the others? We're married now, Your Grace. The contracts are signed. The vows are spoken. You're stuck with me, just as I'm stuck with you. So you can stand there and rage about my presumption, or you can look at what I've actually accomplished and decide if perhaps, just perhaps, your way isn't the only way." For a long, terrible moment, the Duke said nothing. His face had gone white, 2 spots of color high on his cheekbones. When he finally spoke, his voice was so cold it could have frozen the plants around them. "Mrs. Granger's office, 1 hour, with a complete accounting of every change you've made." He turned on his heel and strode toward the door, then paused. "And Eliza, don't mistake my silence for acceptance. We will discuss the limits of your authority, at length." Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing away through the manor. Eliza stood alone in the conservatory, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. Then her legs gave out, and she sank onto one of the stone benches, dropping her head into her shaking hands. "Sweet, merciful heaven," she whispered, "what have I done?" "You told him the truth," Catherine's voice came from the doorway, "which is either brilliant or suicidal, possibly both." Eliza looked up to find the Duke's sister leaning against the frame, an expression of delighted astonishment on her face. "How long were you listening?" "Long enough to hear you call his life's work a wasteland and his marriage a mausoleum. I've been waiting 20 years for someone to say that to his face." Catherine came forward, examining the conservatory with open appreciation. "Though I admit, I expected him to explode rather than retreat. That's new." "He's going to send me away," Eliza said dully. "He can't. As you so accurately pointed out, you're married now. It would cause a scandal, damage his reputation, and require him to explain why his third attempt at securing an heir failed." Catherine sat beside her on the bench. "No, Rowan's stuck with you. The question is what he'll do about it. He'll make my life miserable." "Probably. But Eliza, look what you've done here." Catherine gestured at the transformed space. "In less than 2 weeks, you've accomplished what no one else dared attempt. You've challenged him, questioned his methods, and, most dangerously, you've shown results that prove you might be right." "I didn't mean to challenge him," Eliza said weakly. "I just wanted to fix what was broken." "That is the challenge. My brother has spent 2 decades convincing himself that emotion, beauty, anything that doesn't serve immediate practical purpose is weakness. You've just demonstrated that beauty and practicality aren't mutually exclusive." Catherine smiled. "He'll hate that. But he's also too intelligent to ignore evidence when it's staring him in the face." Eliza wasn't so sure, but she dragged herself to her feet, straightened her filthy dress, and went to face whatever consequences awaited. The meeting in Mrs. Granger's office was excruciating. The Duke sat behind the housekeeper's desk like a judge at sentencing while Eliza presented her documentation. Every expense, every labor hour, every decision, all laid out in meticulous detail that mirrored his own record-keeping style. He read through it in absolute silence, his face revealing nothing. Mrs. Granger stood in the corner, her expression anxious. Thomas the steward had been summoned as well, looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. Finally, the Duke set down the last page. "You used 17 days of accumulated servant leave, 63 pounds worth of salvaged materials, and approximately 200 hours of redirected labor." "Yes, Your Grace." "And you estimate the conservatory will generate how much annual income?" "Conservatively? 300 pounds in the first year, increasing as our stock matures and our reputation spreads. William has contacts among London plant collectors who've already expressed interest." "Conservatively," the Duke repeated, his tone unreadable. "And if your estimates are wrong? Then I've wasted 63 pounds of materials that were rotting in sheds and labor hours that were already allocated. The estate loses nothing it didn't already consider lost." He leaned back in the chair, steepling his fingers. "You've also reorganized work schedules, renegotiated supplier contracts, and implemented changes to servant quarters without consultation. The servant quarters needed basic repairs. broken windows, leaking roofs. I used materials already on hand and labor during off hours. Total cost was £9 for materials we had to purchase new. In return, we've retained 3 maids who are planning to leave and improved overall household efficiency by approximately 11% according to Mrs. Granger's metrics. I don't recall authorizing those expenditures. You left me in charge of the household, Eliza repeated. These were household matters. Everything on this estate is my concern. Then perhaps you shouldn't have married someone and left immediately, expecting her to manage in your absence without clear instruction on where her authority begins and ends. Mrs. Granger made a small sound of distress. Thomas studied the ceiling with intense focus. The Duke's eyes had gone absolutely glacial. "Leave us," he said quietly. "All of you." The staff fled. The door closed. Eliza was alone with her husband for only the second time since their wedding, and unlike their wedding night, there was no escape. "Sit," the Duke commanded. Eliza sat, mainly because her legs were still shaking. He rose and moved to the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind him in a posture that radiated rigid control. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully measured, each word precisely chosen. "I am not an easy man, Eliza. I'm aware of this. I'm demanding, exacting, and I have little patience for inefficiency or emotional manipulation. The women who came before you couldn't accept that. They wanted something I couldn't give. Romance, affection, the pretty lies that pass for marriage in polite society. I was honest about my limitations. They chose to ignore that honesty, then blamed me when reality failed to match their fantasies." He turned to face her. "You are the first who seemed to understand what this marriage actually was. A practical arrangement between 2 adults who needed something from each other. I needed an heir and a capable household manager. You needed security and a position. Simple, clear, no messy emotions to complicate matters." "That's what I agreed to," Eliza said carefully. "Then why this?" He gestured toward the conservatory, toward the changes she'd made. "Why push beyond the boundaries? Why challenge systems that have functioned efficiently for years? Why risk antagonizing me when your security depends on my goodwill?" It was a fair question. Eliza considered it carefully before answering. "Because I can't breathe in a mausoleum," she said finally. "You're right. I understood the terms. I accepted them. I didn't expect affection or romance, but I also didn't expect to be left alone in a dying house, surrounded by neglect and waste, told to maintain order while everything beautiful withered around me. That's not management, Your Grace. That's presiding over slow decay. This estate is one of the most profitable in England, and one of the saddest." Eliza met his eyes. "You've optimized everything for maximum efficiency and minimum emotional investment. You've cut away beauty, comfort, anything that might make this place feel like a home rather than a business enterprise. And maybe that works for you. Maybe you're content living in a fortress of your own design, keeping everything and everyone at arm's length. But I'm not built that way. I can't live in a place without trying to make it better." "Better by whose measure?" "By any measure that includes human happiness alongside profit margins." She stood, too agitated to remain seated. "Your staff is loyal but exhausted. Your house is magnificent but hollow. Your lands are productive but joyless. You've achieved everything you set out to do after your father died. You've rebuilt the finances, restored the family name, made this estate a model of efficiency. But somewhere in all that achieving, you forgot that places need souls, not just systems." The Duke's expression had gone very still. "You know nothing about what I've built here. I know that William still grieves for the gardens your mother loved. I know that Mrs. Granger keeps a portrait of your parents hidden in her quarters because you can't bear to have it displayed. I know that the conservatory you designed at 17, a masterpiece of engineering and love, has been rotting for 5 years because you couldn't stand to look at it anymore." "Enough," he said sharply. "No, not enough. Not nearly enough." Eliza's fear had burned away, leaving only a strange, reckless clarity. "You wanted honesty in this marriage, Your Grace? Then let me be honest. You're brilliant, capable, and so terrified of feeling anything that you've built your entire life around avoiding it. And that's your right. But you married me, brought me into this beautiful, broken place, and now you're angry that I refuse to participate in its slow death. I should never have married me? You're probably right. But you did, and now we both have to live with the consequences. She moved toward the door, then paused. The accounting you requested is complete and accurate. Review it, reject it, do whatever you need to do. But the conservatory is restored, the staff is happier, and the household runs more efficiently than it did 2 weeks ago. Those are facts, not feelings. And if you can't see the value in that because it challenges your careful control, then perhaps the problem isn't my presumption. It's your fear. She left before he could respond, closing the door quietly behind her. In the corridor, she finally let herself shake. She'd just told the Duke of Blackthorn he was afraid. She'd called his life's work joyless and his management insufficient. She'd challenged him at every turn, pushed every boundary, and probably destroyed any chance of a peaceful coexistence. Catherine was waiting at the end of the hall, concern written across her face. Well? I think I just ended my marriage before it really began, Eliza said, surprised by how calm she sounded. What did you say to him? The truth. All of it. Catherine's eyes widened. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed. Oh, this is going to be interesting. But interesting wasn't the word Eliza would have chosen for the days that followed. The Duke withdrew into cold, impenetrable silence. He took his meals in his study, conducted his business through Thomas and Mrs. Granger, and avoided any situation that might require him to speak directly to his wife. It was as if Eliza had become invisible, acknowledged in household documents and necessary communications, but otherwise completely erased from his awareness. It should have been a relief. Instead, it was suffocating. The staff noticed, of course. Servants always noticed. The whispers started immediately. The new Duchess had angered the Duke, just like the others. How long before she was sent away? How long before he gave up on marriage altogether? Eliza ignored the whispers and kept working. If the Duke wanted to pretend she didn't exist, fine. She'd prove her value through results he couldn't ignore. She expanded her reorganization of the household, finding efficiencies the previous system had missed. She worked with William to begin propagating rare plant specimens for sale. She reviewed the estate's charitable contributions and found ways to do more good with the same budget. She studied the Duke's own methods and learned to think like he did, in systems, in measurable outcomes, in cold, hard evidence. And slowly, grudgingly, the estate began to respond. 3 days after their confrontation, Thomas appeared at her study door. Your Grace, the northern tenants have sent a letter. They're asking if you'd be willing to visit and advise on some household management issues in the village. Eliza looked up from the accounts she was reviewing. Why would they ask me? The Duke has always handled tenant matters himself. Apparently word has spread about the improvements you've made here. The tenants' wives are hoping you might share some of your methods. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. His Grace would normally approve such visits, but given the current situation, I thought I should ask you directly. It was a test, Eliza realized, or perhaps an opportunity. If she refused, she'd look weak, afraid to act without explicit permission. If she accepted without consulting the Duke, she'd be overstepping again. She made her decision. Tell them I'll come next week. And Thomas? Inform His Grace of my plans. I won't hide what I'm doing, but I also won't ask permission to help people who've requested my assistance. The steward nodded, relief crossing his face. Yes, Your Grace. That evening, Eliza was working late in the conservatory, checking the new plant's progress, when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find the Duke standing in the doorway exactly where he'd stood 5 days earlier. You're going to the northern tenants, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, they asked for help with household management. It seemed reasonable to assist them. Did it occur to you to consult me first? Did it occur to you to speak to me directly at any point in the last 5 days? Eliza set down her gardening tools. You've made your position clear, Your Grace. You want results without involvement, efficiency without consultation, so I'm providing exactly that. The tenants are my responsibility. And household management is mine. If their wives need advice on running their homes more efficiently, that falls under my purview, not yours. She pulled off her work gloves. Unless you'd like to redefine the boundaries of my authority, because I'd welcome that conversation. I asked for it a week ago, but you've been too busy ignoring my existence to provide any clarity. A muscle twitched in his jaw. I haven't been ignoring you. No? Then what would you call 5 days of silence, meals taken separately, and all communication conducted through intermediaries? I've been allowing us both time to adjust. You've been hiding, Eliza corrected, just like you hid at the Northern Estates after our wedding, just like you hid from the conservatory for 5 years after closing it. Every time something threatens your carefully controlled world, you retreat into silence and distance and pretend it doesn't exist. That's not, it is true, and we both know it. She moved closer to him, tired of the constant, careful distance. So here's what's going to happen, Your Grace. I'm going to the Northern tenants. I'm going to help them improve their household management just as I've improved yours. I'm going to continue working in this conservatory, in these gardens, in this house, making things better whether you approve or not. And you're going to decide if you want to be part of that progress, or if you'd rather keep hiding in your study, pretending that efficiency and isolation are the same thing as strength. The Duke stared at her, something unreadable moving behind those winter eyes. You're not like the others, he said finally, his voice strange. No, I'm not. The others wanted your heart. I just want your respect. Eliza picked up her tools again, turning back to her work. But I'm beginning to think you're incapable of giving either. She heard him leave, his footsteps fading into the darkness beyond the conservatory's glass walls. The next morning, Eliza found a note on her breakfast tray. The handwriting was precise, controlled, each letter perfectly formed. I will accompany you to the Northern tenants. We leave Wednesday at dawn. R.B. She read it 3 times, searching for hidden meaning or trap. But there was nothing, just a simple statement of intent. The Duke was coming with her. Eliza wasn't sure if that was progress or a disaster waiting to happen. Wednesday arrived cold and gray, with frost coating the manor's grounds in glittering white. Eliza dressed carefully in her warmest traveling clothes and went down to find the Duke already waiting by the carriage, dressed in heavy wool and dark leather, looking every inch the forbidding aristocrat. Your Grace, he said formally, handing her into the carriage. Your Grace, she responded, equally cool. They rode in silence for the first hour, the only sound the clatter of wheels on frozen ground and the occasional snort from the horses. The landscape rolled past in shades of gray and white, bare trees, dormant fields, stone walls disappearing into mist. Finally, Eliza couldn't bear it anymore. Why did you decide to come? The Duke didn't look at her. He was staring out the window as if the bleak countryside held answers to questions he hadn't asked. Catherine pointed out that avoiding you was accomplishing nothing except making us both miserable and providing entertainment for the servants. Catherine is perceptive. Catherine is meddlesome. But there was something almost fond in his tone. She also suggested that perhaps my methods, as effective as they've been, might benefit from alternative perspectives. Eliza raised an eyebrow. That must have been a difficult conversation. You have no idea. He finally turned to face her. She reminded me that the last time I refused to consider alternatives, we lost 3 excellent servants and the orangery collapsed because I'd delayed repairs too long. Apparently, I have a pattern of being too rigid in my thinking. Apparently, Eliza agreed. A ghost of something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. You're not going to let me forget this, are you? Not for a moment. They fell back into silence, but it was marginally less oppressive than before. As the carriage climbed into the hills toward the Northern tenants' village, Eliza found herself studying her husband's profile. He was handsome in that harsh, unforgiving way, all sharp edges and controlled power. But there were shadows under his eyes she hadn't noticed before, and his hands, resting on his knees, looked tense despite his carefully relaxed posture. You said you never tried to be easy, Eliza said quietly. But have you ever tried to be happy? The Duke's expression closed immediately. Happiness is irrelevant to running an estate efficiently. Is it? Or is that just what you tell yourself to justify the isolation? I'm not isolated. I manage 10,000 acres and hundreds of people's livelihoods. I'm constantly surrounded by responsibilities, obligations, problems to solve. But When was the last time you were surrounded by anything that brought you joy? He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, very quietly, the conservatory. When I was building the irrigation system. I was happy then. Eliza's heart clenched. Your mother must have been very proud. She died before I finished it. His voice was carefully flat. Heart failure, sudden and unexpected. One morning she was planning which orchids to order, and by evening she was gone. I'm sorry. It was 20 years ago. And you sealed up the conservatory 5 years ago? Eliza said gently. Which means you kept it running for 15 years after she died, maintaining something she never got to see finished. That doesn't sound like a man who considers happiness irrelevant. The Duke turned to look at her, really look at her, for the first time since they'd married. Catherine was right, he said finally. You are different from the others. Before Eliza could respond, the carriage jolted to a stop. They'd arrived. The northern tenant village was a collection of perhaps 20 stone cottages clustered around a small square. As the Duke's carriage rolled in, doors opened and people emerged, men pulling off caps respectfully, women curtsying, children staring with wide eyes. Your Grace, the village headman said, bowing deeply. We're honored by your visit. What followed was a revelation. Eliza had expected the Duke to be distant with his tenants, treating them with the same cold efficiency he applied to everything else. Instead, he knew every family by name. He asked after children, inquired about crops, discussed repairs and concerns with genuine attention. These people didn't fear him, they respected him. And in their faces, she saw something she hadn't expected: affection. His Grace saved my Da's farm when the floods came, a young woman whispered to Eliza as they toured the village. Forgave a year's rent, helped rebuild the barn himself. Worked alongside us for 3 days straight, another tenant added. When the fever came through 5 winters back, His Grace brought the doctor from London, paid for medicine for everyone. Lost 4 families that winter, but would have lost 20 without him. Slowly, Eliza began to understand. The Duke's coldness, his distance, that was for himself, for his own protection. But for these people, the ones who depended on him, he was something else entirely. Reliable, just, even kind in his own way. The contradiction was dizzying. She spent the afternoon with the tenants' wives, sharing the organizational methods she'd developed at the manor. They were eager students, asking intelligent questions and offering insights about their own challenges. By evening, they developed a cooperative system for bulk purchasing, shared childcare, and seasonal labor that would benefit all the families. You've done in one day what I've been trying to accomplish for months, the headman's wife said gratefully. Thank you, Your Grace. On the journey back, as darkness fell and the carriage lamps cast flickering shadows, the Duke spoke again. You were right, he said abruptly. Eliza blinked. About what? The conservatory, the gardens, the servant quarters, all of it. He still wasn't looking at her, but his hands had finally relaxed. I've been so focused on maintaining control, on proving I could manage everything through sheer discipline, that I stopped seeing what was actually needed. Catherine's been telling me that for years, but I dismissed it as sentiment. Today, watching you with the tenants, seeing how quickly they responded to your methods. He paused. I saw what I've been missing. Which is? That efficiency and humanity aren't opposites. That caring about people's well-being doesn't make you weak or expose you to disappointment. It makes the entire system work better. He finally turned to face her in the dim light. You've accomplished more in 2 weeks than I managed in years, not despite caring about beauty and happiness, but because of it. Eliza felt something shift in her chest. Not hope exactly, but the possibility of hope. So what happens now? Now, the Duke said slowly. We try something I'm very bad at, collaboration. You're asking me to work with you? I'm asking you to help me rebuild what I've let die. Not just the conservatory and the gardens, but, he gestured vaguely, all of it. The parts of this place that used to have soul, as you put it. And in return? In return, I'll stop hiding in my study and actually participate in my own life. His mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Fair warning, I'll probably be terrible at it. I've spent 20 years building walls. I'm not sure I remember how to tear them down. Then it's fortunate, Eliza said, her own lips curving, that you married someone who's proven quite good at breaking through your defenses. The Duke actually laughed, a short, rusty sound as if the mechanism had seized from disuse. But it was genuine. When they arrived back at Blackthorn Manor, he handed her down from the carriage himself. His hand was warm through her glove, solid and real in a way nothing had felt since their wedding. "Tomorrow morning," he said, still holding her hand, "we'll review the estate plans together, all of them. I want your opinion on where else we might be letting Beauty die for the sake of efficiency." "Tomorrow morning," Eliza agreed. She went to bed that night feeling something she hadn't felt since agreeing to this marriage, the possibility that it might become something more than a prison sentence. But she'd underestimated how many people had invested in her failure. The next morning, she woke to find Catherine at her door, her face pale and strained. "We have a problem," Catherine said grimly. "A big one." Eliza's stomach dropped. "What kind of problem?" "The kind where the Duke's creditors are calling in debts that don't exist. 3 of your best innovations have mysteriously malfunctioned overnight, and there's a delegation from London waiting in the drawing room to inform Rowan that his choice of bride has damaged his reputation beyond repair." Catherine's eyes were fierce. "Someone wants you gone, Eliza, and they're not being subtle about it." Eliza's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, debts that don't exist?" Catherine pulled her into the corridor, away from the servants who were beginning their morning routines. "I mean, someone has forged documents claiming Rowan owes substantial sums to 3 different London banks. The documents look official, seals, signatures, everything, and the banks are threatening legal action if payment isn't made immediately. That's impossible. The Duke's finances are impeccable." "We know that, but the delegation downstairs doesn't care about truth. They care about scandal. They're claiming that Rowan's marriage to a woman from a bankrupt family proves he's financially desperate, that he's been hiding his deteriorating situation, and that his credibility as a landowner is now in question." Catherine's hands clenched into fists. "They want him to dissolve the marriage to restore public confidence." Eliza felt the walls closing in. "Who are these people?" "Lord Pemberton, Sir James Hawthorne, and Edmund Carstairs. 3 of the most influential men in London society. They sit on banking boards, control trade agreements, and have enough power to destroy Rowan's reputation with a few well-placed words." Catherine's expression was grim. "And they're not here out of concern for my brother's well-being. Someone sent them." "Who would—" Eliza stopped as understanding crashed over her. "The previous arrangements, the women your brother dismissed. Or their families, yes. The Ashford girl's father is connected to Pemberton. The Sutton woman's brother does business with Hawthorne. Either could have orchestrated this." Catherine gripped Eliza's shoulders. "But here's what you need to understand. If Rowan caves to this pressure, if he lets them dictate his choices, he'll lose more than his marriage. He'll lose the independence he's fought 20 years to maintain. These men will own him." Eliza's mind raced. "Where's the Duke now?" "In his study, reviewing the forged documents. Thomas is with him, trying to trace their origin. But Eliza—" Catherine's voice dropped. "The delegation is demanding an audience within the hour, and they've brought the county magistrate with them. This is more than social pressure. They're threatening legal action." Exactly, which means we don't have time for careful strategy or measured responses." Catherine released her shoulders, stepping back. "So the question is, what are you prepared to do?" Eliza didn't hesitate. "Whatever it takes." "Where's the delegation now?" "The East Drawing Room. Mrs. Granger has them stalled with tea and excuses, but that won't last much longer." "Good. I need 15 minutes. Tell them the Duchess will receive them shortly." Eliza was already moving toward her chambers. "And Catherine, find William. Tell him to bring the conservatory's sales ledger and every letter of interest we've received from London plant collectors." "What are you planning?" "To prove that I'm not a liability. I'm an asset. And that anyone who thinks otherwise has severely underestimated what they're dealing with." 14 minutes later, Eliza descended the main staircase dressed in her finest gown, a deep emerald silk that had belonged to her mother, altered to fit her slimmer frame. She'd arranged her hair with Catherine's help, pulled back severely to emphasize the sharp intelligence in her eyes, rather than softening her features. She wore the Blackthorn garnet wedding ring prominently, and carried herself like she owned not just the manor, but everyone in it. Mrs. Granger met her at the drawing-room door, her expression anxious. "Your Grace, they're demanding to see His Grace, not—" "I know what they're demanding. Is the Duke still in his study?" "Yes, Your Grace. He said he'd join you shortly, but—" "Tell him to stay there. I'll handle this." Eliza nodded to the footman. "Open the doors." The East Drawing Room was one of the manor's grandest spaces, high ceilings, massive windows overlooking the restored gardens, furniture that had belonged to Blackthorn Dukes for 3 generations. The 3 men waiting there looked supremely confident in their expensive London tailoring and carefully cultivated expressions of concern. Lord Pemberton was tall and silver-haired, with the kind of face that suggested he'd been handsome once and hadn't yet accepted that age had claimed that advantage. Sir James Hawthorne was younger, perhaps 40, with sharp features and eyes that calculated value the way a moneylender assessed collateral. Edmund Carstairs was the eldest, nearly 60, with the soft hands and hard eyes of a man who'd built his fortune on other people's desperation. Standing slightly apart from them was Magistrate Whitlock, a nervous-looking man in his 50s who clearly wished he were anywhere else. All 4 turned when Eliza entered. Pemberton's expression shifted from confidence to confusion to barely concealed disdain in the space of 3 seconds. "Gentlemen," Eliza said, her voice carrying the same cool authority she'd heard the Duke use, "I understand you've come with concerns about my husband's finances and our marriage. I'm here to address them." "We asked to see the Duke," Pemberton said, his tone dismissive. "This is hardly a matter for his wife, the Duchess of Blackthorn?" Eliza settled into the room's largest chair, the one traditionally reserved for the Duke, with deliberate precision. "I assure you, gentlemen, anything concerning this estate's reputation concerns me directly. Now, I believe you have documents you wish to discuss?" Hawthorne exchanged glances with Pemberton, then stepped forward. "Your Grace, with all respect, these are financial matters of significant complexity. Perhaps it would be better if you explained them to me as you would to any intelligent adult capable of understanding basic accounting." Eliza extended her hand. "The documents, please." Carstairs actually laughed. "My dear young woman, these involve international credit arrangements, complex loan structures, and forged signatures, falsified seals, and fabricated debts designed to create the illusion of financial instability." Eliza's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Yes, I'm quite familiar with the documents. My husband's steward briefed me this morning. So let's dispense with the pretense, shall we? You're not here because you believe these debts are real. You're here because someone paid you to create a scandal that would force the Duke to dissolve our marriage." The room went absolutely silent. Pemberton's face flushed dark red. "That's a serious accusation." "Is it an accusation if it's true?" Eliza leaned forward. "Let me tell you what I know, gentlemen. These supposed debts date from periods when the Duke's finances were meticulously documented by 3 separate auditors as part of his annual estate reviews. The signatures on your documents don't match samples from the actual banks. The flourish on the initial is wrong, and the spacing is inconsistent. And most damningly, 2 of the banks you claim issued these loans don't actually offer the type of credit described in your paperwork." She watched the color drain from Hawthorne's face with grim satisfaction. "So here's what's going to happen," Eliza continued. "You're going to tell me who hired you to manufacture this crisis. Then you're going to leave this estate, return to London, and make it abundantly clear that any further attempts to damage the Duke's reputation will be met with legal action for fraud, libel, and conspiracy. Are we clear?" "You can't threaten us," Carstairs sputtered. "We're acting on behalf of concerned parties who want me gone because I represent a threat to their plans." Eliza stood, and something in her movement made all 3 men step back. "Let me guess. One of the women the Duke considered before me, or their families, didn't appreciate being set aside. They thought they could pressure him into reconsidering by making his actual marriage appear disastrous. What they didn't count on was that I'm not some simpering debutante who'll collapse under pressure." William appeared in the doorway, right on cue, carrying the conservatory ledger and a stack of letters. Eliza took them with a nod of thanks. "Since you're so concerned about the estate's finances," she said, opening the ledger, "let me share some actual facts. In 3 weeks, I've increased household efficiency by 14%, reduced operating costs by 9%, and established a new revenue stream through the restored conservatory that's already generated advance orders worth £600. I have letters here from 12 London collectors requesting rare specimens, 3 offers to showcase our plants at the Royal Horticultural Society, and an inquiry from the Prince Regent's gardener about purchasing stock. She set the ledger on the table between them with enough force to make them jump. This estate is more profitable, more stable, and more respected than it was a month ago, and that improvement is directly attributable to my management. So if you think I'm a liability, gentlemen, you're not just wrong. You're spectacularly incompetent at basic assessment. Magistrate Whitlock cleared his throat nervously. Your Grace, I should mention that the documents they provided, upon closer examination, there are indeed irregularities that concern me. Whitlock, you were supposed to— Pemberton started. I was supposed to verify the legitimacy of claims before allowing them to be used for legal action, the magistrate interrupted, his voice gaining strength, which I have now done. These documents are fraudulent, and I will be filing a report to that effect. He turned to Eliza. My apologies, Your Grace. I should have examined them more carefully before agreeing to accompany these gentlemen. Pemberton's face had gone from red to purple. This is outrageous. We were assured— You were assured of what, exactly? The Duke's voice came from the doorway, cold as winter steel. That my wife would be easily intimidated? That I would cave to social pressure and abandon my marriage to preserve some imagined reputation? He entered the room, and Eliza saw something in his expression she'd never seen before. Pure, controlled rage. He moved to stand beside her chair, one hand coming to rest on its back in a gesture of unmistakable solidarity. My wife has just demonstrated more intelligence, courage, and capability in 10 minutes than the 3 of you have shown in your entire visit, the Duke continued, his voice deadly quiet. She's also correct about the forgeries, the motivations behind them, and the appropriate response. So I'll ask you once, and only once, who paid you to do this? The 3 London men exchanged panicked glances. Finally, Hawthorne broke. Lady Ashford, she approached us 6 weeks ago, after she learned you'd actually married. She was displeased that her daughter had been passed over. Displeased enough to commit fraud? She claimed it was justice, not fraud, that you damaged her daughter's reputation by courting her and then marrying someone from a bankrupt family instead. She wanted you to understand what financial ruin actually felt like. Hawthorne's voice had gone thin. We didn't think the documents would hold up to scrutiny. They were just meant to create doubt, to make society question your judgment. And you agreed to this because? Eliza asked. Carstairs shifted uncomfortably. Lady Ashford has considerable influence. She controls access to several profitable trade agreements that our businesses depend on. She made it clear that refusing her request would have consequences. So you chose to destroy an innocent man's reputation rather than stand up to one vindictive woman. The Duke's contempt was palpable. Get out, all of you. And if I hear even a whisper of this story circulating in London, I will use every resource at my disposal to ensure your businesses, your reputations, and your social standing are utterly demolished. Are we clear? They fled. Within minutes, the drawing room was empty except for Eliza, the Duke, Catherine, and the magistrate. Whitlock approached Eliza with obvious embarrassment. Your Grace, I truly apologize. I should have— You recognized the truth when it was presented to you, Eliza said, softening her tone. That's more than they did. Thank you for your integrity. After the magistrate left, Catherine let out a long breath. Well, that was either brilliant or completely insane. Probably both, Eliza admitted. Her hands were shaking now that the confrontation was over. Did I overstep? The Duke was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. Overstep? You just dismantled a coordinated attack on this estate's reputation using nothing but intelligence and absolute fearlessness. I'm not sure overstep even begins to cover what you just did. Are you angry? Angry? He actually laughed, though it sounded slightly unhinged. Eliza, I'm terrified. I've spent 20 years building walls to protect this estate, and you just demonstrated that the best defense isn't walls at all. It's having someone by your side brilliant enough and brave enough to fight battles you didn't even know were coming. Catherine grinned. I told you she was different. but Eliza's mind was already racing ahead. This isn't over. Lady Ashford won't accept defeat this easily. She has too much influence, too many connections. We've won this battle, but she'll come at us another way, the Duke finished grimly. You're right. We need to think strategically about our next move. Actually, Eliza said slowly, an idea forming, I think we need to go on offense. Stop reacting to her attacks and start building something she can't tear down. What do you have in mind? A demonstration. Something public and undeniable that proves this estate isn't just surviving, it's thriving. Something that makes it clear I'm not a liability or a scandal, but a genuine asset. She turned to face him fully. The conservatory is ready. The plant specimens are mature enough to show. What if we hosted an exhibition? Invited every influential person in 3 counties, every plant collector in London, the Royal Horticultural Society, everyone. Show them exactly what we've accomplished. Catherine's eyes lit up. That's brilliant. An open challenge. Either she admits defeat or she has to attack you publicly, which would make her look petty and vindictive. But the Duke looked troubled. Eliza, that would put you directly in the spotlight. Everything you've done, everything you are. It would all be subject to scrutiny and judgment. Society can be vicious, especially to women who don't fit their expectations. I stopped fitting expectations the day I married you, Eliza said. And I'd rather be judged for what I've actually accomplished than hide and let malicious gossip define me. Besides, what's she going to attack? The fact that I've increased efficiency, restored a dying conservatory, improved tenant relations? Those are objective successes, not matters of opinion. She'll attack your background, your family's bankruptcy, the fact that our marriage was obviously a financial arrangement. Let her. I'm not ashamed of where I came from or why I married you, and anyone with half a brain will see that I've more than justified my position here. Eliza felt the same reckless determination that had carried her through the confrontation with the London delegation. The question is whether you're willing to stand beside me when the spotlight turns our way, because I can survive their judgment, Your Grace. But I need to know you won't abandon me to face it alone. The Duke was silent for a long moment, studying her face as if seeing her for the first time. Then he held out his hand. Partners. That's what I promised you yesterday. Partners means standing together, even when, especially when, it's difficult. Eliza took his hand. His grip was warm and solid and utterly steady. Then we plan an exhibition that London society won't forget. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Word of the confrontation with the London delegation had spread through the servant network like wildfire, and instead of creating doubt, it had galvanized the staff. They'd seen their Duchess face down 3 powerful men and win. Now they were determined to prove she deserved that victory. The conservatory became the focus of everything. William worked 16-hour days coaxing the plants into their most spectacular displays. Eliza designed the layout like a military campaign, strategic placement to showcase each specimen, educational materials explaining the innovative irrigation system, documentation of costs versus projected revenue that would appeal to practical minds. The Duke, true to his word, worked alongside them. He reviewed every financial projection, challenged every assumption, and helped design display cases that would protect delicate specimens while allowing visitors to examine them closely. And slowly, grudgingly, Eliza began to see glimpses of the young man who'd built the irrigation system at 17, creative, passionate, fully engaged in creation rather than just management. "You're enjoying this," she said one evening, finding him adjusting a display of rare ferns with the concentration of an artist perfecting a painting. He looked up, startled. "I suppose I am. I'd forgotten what it feels like to build something beautiful rather than just maintaining what already exists." "Your mother would be proud." His expression softened in a way she'd never seen before. "She would have liked you. She always said the worst thing about being a duchess was the expectation that you'd be decorative rather than useful. You managed to be both." It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd given her since their wedding. Eliza felt warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you." But as the exhibition date approached, signs of Lady Ashford's countermove began to appear. Small things at first, invitations declined by people who'd initially accepted, whispered rumors in London about the Duke's desperation, pointed questions about whether Eliza had actually managed the improvements or merely taken credit for staff work. Then the letters started arriving. Anonymous, vicious things that questioned everything from Eliza's competence to her morality. They hinted at impropriety, suggested she'd trapped the Duke through manipulation, even implied she was secretly bleeding the estate dry for her bankrupt family's benefit. The Duke wanted to burn them. Eliza insisted on keeping them. Evidence, she said, filing each one carefully. If this escalates to legal action, we'll need documentation of harassment. You're very calm about people questioning your character. I've been questioned and doubted my entire life. I'm a woman who kept her father's books, managed his estate after he became incapable, and somehow failed to attract a husband until desperation made me marketable. Society's opinion of me has never been high. She looked up at him. But I've also learned that the best response to doubt isn't defense, it's undeniable results. The night before the exhibition, Eliza couldn't sleep. She walked through the conservatory one final time, checking every detail, making sure nothing had been overlooked. The space was magnificent now, a living testament to what careful restoration and passionate attention could achieve. The irrigation system hummed quietly, misting the air with moisture. Exotic flowers bloomed in carefully controlled microclimates. The glass dome overhead reflected starlight in fractured patterns across the leaves below. She found the Duke there too, standing in the shadows near the entrance, just watching. Couldn't sleep either? She asked quietly. Too much at stake. If this fails, if they reject what we've done here, it won't just damage your reputation. It'll confirm every whisper that I made a mistake marrying you. He turned to face her. I can handle people questioning my judgment, but the thought of them attacking you, tearing apart everything you've accomplished, then we don't fail, Eliza said simply. We've done the work. We have the evidence. We know the truth. Tomorrow, we show everyone else. You make it sound simple. It is simple. The complicated part is having the courage to stand by the truth when everyone's trying to convince you it's a lie. She moved closer to him. But I've had practice with that, and now I have something I didn't have before. A partner who's proven he won't run when things get difficult. The Duke's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with unexpected tenderness. I won't run, he said quietly. Not from this, and not from you. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. For a moment, Eliza thought he might kiss her. A real kiss, not the cold formality of their wedding. But he pulled back, clearing his throat, the walls coming up again. We should rest. Tomorrow will be demanding. Yes, Eliza agreed, trying to ignore the disappointment curling through her stomach. Tomorrow. The exhibition began at 11. By 10:30, carriages were already arriving, disgorging London society in all its fashionable glory. Eliza greeted guests in the conservatory entrance, the Duke at her side, both of them playing their roles with perfect precision. Catherine worked the crowd like a general deploying troops, steering influential people toward the most impressive displays, making sure the right conversations happened in the right combinations. William gave technical demonstrations of the irrigation system to fascinated horticulturalists. Thomas provided financial projections to the practical-minded landowners. It was going perfectly. Too perfectly. Eliza felt it like a change in air pressure, something wrong hovering just beyond her perception. She scanned the crowd, looking for the threat she knew was coming. And then she saw her. Lady Ashford stood near the main entrance, resplendent in crimson silk, surrounded by a group of London's most influential gossips. She was smiling, but her eyes were cold as she surveyed the conservatory with obvious disdain. She actually came, Catherine muttered, appearing at Eliza's elbow. Bold move. Or strategic. Eliza watched as Lady Ashford began moving through the crowd, stopping to speak with various guests, her expression sympathetic and concerned. She's positioning herself as the voice of reason, the concerned observer who's only trying to help. The Duke had seen her too. His expression had gone absolutely rigid. I'll handle this. No. Eliza caught his arm. That's what she wants. You confronting her publicly plays into her narrative that you're emotionally compromised, that I've made you unstable. We stick to the plan. Let the work speak for itself. But Lady Ashford wasn't interested in letting the work speak. As the crowd gathered for William's formal presentation on the conservatory's restoration and commercial potential, She positioned herself prominently in the front row. "Fascinating," she said when William finished, her voice carrying clearly through the space. "Though I do wonder how much of this impressive restoration was actually accomplished by the Duchess herself, versus skilled professionals simply following orders?" The crowd went silent. Every eye turned to Eliza. "The restoration was a collaborative effort," Eliza said evenly. "I designed the layout and commercial strategy. William and his team handled the botanical expertise, and various staff members contributed labor and materials." "Ah, so you designed it." Lady Ashford's smile sharpened. "How interesting. Tell me, do you have formal training in horticulture, or engineering, or commercial agriculture?" "No, my lady. My training was in household management and basic accounting." "Then how can you possibly claim credit for—" "I claim credit for seeing potential where others saw only waste, for having the courage to invest resources in restoration despite significant opposition, and for understanding that profitability and beauty aren't mutually exclusive." Eliza kept her voice calm, factual. "The technical execution required expertise I don't possess, but the vision and the will to make it happen, those were mine." "Vision," Lady Ashford repeated mockingly. "What a convenient word for presumption. Tell me, Your Grace, what qualified you to make such decisions? Your family's spectacular financial collapse? Your complete lack of experience managing anything larger than a modest household? Or perhaps it was your obvious desperation to secure a position that led you to overstep so dramatically?" The crowd murmured. Eliza felt the Duke tense beside her, but she squeezed his hand, a silent signal to wait. "My qualifications," Eliza said clearly, "are the result standing in this conservatory. £600 in advance orders, letters of interest from the Royal Horticultural Society, a functional irrigation system that was designed 20 years ago by the Duke himself and brought back to life through careful engineering and patient restoration, and a demonstration that this estate values innovation and adaptation, not just tradition and rigid control." "Results that could evaporate as quickly as they appeared," Lady Ashford countered. "We've all seen ambitious newcomers make impressive claims, only to have them collapse under scrutiny. What assurance do we have that this isn't simply an elaborate performance designed to justify an obviously mercenary marriage?" "That's enough," the Duke said, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "You've made your position clear, Lady Ashford. You believe my wife is unqualified, presumptuous, and motivated solely by financial desperation. But here's what you're missing. Even if all of that were true, which it isn't, she would still have accomplished more in 3 weeks than most people manage in years." He turned to address the full crowd. "My wife didn't come to this estate with advantages or connections. She came with intelligence, work ethic, and the ability to see potential in forgotten places. And because of that, she's transformed not just this conservatory, but the way this entire household functions. Efficiency is up, costs are down, staff morale has improved, tenant relations are stronger. Those aren't opinions or performances. They're measurable outcomes that anyone can verify." Lady Ashford's expression had gone venomous. "How touching. The Duke defending his purchase. Tell me, Your Grace, how much did her family's debts actually cost you? What was the price for this paragon of household management?" The Duke's face went absolutely white. Eliza felt the world tilt sickeningly as she realized what was about to happen. "The marriage contract," Lady Ashford continued, her voice dripping poison. "The one where you agreed to assume all Whitmore family debts in exchange for a wife who could produce an heir and manage your household. Very practical, very businesslike, but hardly the love match you're trying to present here today." She pulled a folded document from her reticule, and Eliza recognized it instantly. Her father's handwriting, the Duke's signature, the witnesses' marks. It was a copy of their marriage contract, the private document that spelled out exactly how transactional their arrangement had been. "This is a private legal document," the Duke said, his voice shaking with rage. "How did you— Let's just say the Whitmore family's creditors were very forthcoming when offered the right incentive." Lady Ashford held the contract up for everyone to see. "Shall I read the specific terms? The itemized list of debts. The clause specifying that consummation was required for the contract to remain valid, or perhaps the most damning section, the one where the Duke explicitly states that affection plays no role in this arrangement." The crowd erupted. Shocked gasps scandalized whispers, the sound of carefully maintained social facades cracking under the weight of exposed truth. Eliza felt like she was drowning. Everything she'd built, every relationship she'd carefully cultivated, every achievement she'd worked for, all of it was being painted as nothing more than an elaborate transaction. A woman selling herself for security, a man buying a solution to his problems. And the worst part was that it was true. All of it was true. "Well?" Lady Ashford demanded, triumphant. "What do you say to that, Your Grace? Still want to claim this is a real marriage based on mutual respect? Or are you ready to admit that you bought yourself a capable servant and dressed her up as a duchess?" The Duke looked at Eliza, and in his eyes she saw horror and shame and something that might have been apology. He opened his mouth, clearly searching for words that could salvage the situation. But Eliza found her voice first. "You're absolutely right," she said clearly. "Every word of that contract is accurate. I married the Duke because my family was bankrupt and I needed security. He married me because he needed a competent household manager and an heir. There was no romance, no courtship, no pretense of affection. It was a business arrangement, pure and simple." The crowd's murmur rose to a roar. Lady Ashford looked stunned that Eliza had actually admitted it. "But here's what you failed to understand," Eliza continued, her voice gaining strength. "That contract describes how our marriage began. It says nothing about what it's become. Yes, I came here desperate and afraid, purchased like a solution to a problem. And yes, the Duke made it clear from our wedding night that affection would play no role in our arrangement." She turned to face the crowd fully. "So I made a choice. I could accept that limitation and wither away in a beautiful prison, or I could find meaning and purpose despite it. I chose to work. I chose to learn. I chose to see potential in forgotten places and fight to restore them, not because I was trying to prove anything to anyone, but because I couldn't live any other way." The conservatory had gone absolutely silent. Every eye was fixed on Eliza as she laid bare the truth of her existence. And in the process of doing that work, something unexpected happened. The man who bought me as a solution started treating me as a partner. The arrangement that began with cold calculation started developing something warmer. We're not a love match. Maybe we never will be. But we've become something better than what we started as. We've become collaborators, allies, two people who respect each other's strengths and work together toward common goals. She looked directly at Lady Ashford. "So yes, mock the terms of our contract. Question my motives. Suggest that I'm nothing more than a clever servant dressed in silk. But then look at what I've actually accomplished. Look at this conservatory, these results, this estate's transformation. And ask yourself, would you rather have a marriage based on romantic delusions that crumble under pressure, or a partnership based on mutual respect that gets stronger with every challenge?" For a long moment, no one spoke. Then an older woman in the crowd, someone Eliza recognized as the Duchess of Somerset, one of the most influential women in England, began to clap. Slowly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm. Others joined her, not everyone. Lady Ashford's faction remained silent and furious. But enough people that the applause built into genuine approval. "Brilliantly said," the Duchess of Somerset declared, moving forward to take Eliza's hands. "I've sat through 30 years of society marriages based on pretty lies and watched most of them decay into miserable farces. Give me honest practicality over false romance any day." Other voices rose in agreement. A prominent landowner praised the Duke's business acumen in securing such a capable partner. A horticulturalist lauded Eliza's vision in restoring the conservatory. Even some of Lady Ashford's former supporters began to drift away, clearly reassessing their positions. But Lady Ashford herself had gone rigid with fury. "You think a pretty speech changes the fundamental corruption of—" "I think," the Duke interrupted, his voice deadly quiet, "that you've revealed more about your own character than my wife's. You've stolen private documents, manufactured scandals, and attacked a woman whose only crime was being more capable than your daughter. And you've done it all because you couldn't accept that I chose competence and character over pedigree and connections." He stepped forward, and something in his movement made Lady Ashford step back. "But here's what you've accomplished with this performance. You've forced me to confront truths I've been avoiding. My marriage did begin as a transaction. I did buy my wife's presence in exchange for security. And for weeks, I've been treating that transaction as if it defined everything about our relationship." He turned to Eliza, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. "But my wife is right. What we've become is so much more than how we started. She's challenged me, changed me, forced me to see possibilities I'd given up on years ago. And somewhere in the process of working alongside her, fighting beside her, watching her refuse to be diminished by circumstances that would have destroyed lesser people." He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. The crowd leaned in, breathless. "Somewhere in all of that," he said quietly, "the transaction became something real." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. The Duke took her hands and she could feel them trembling. "I'm not good at this," he said. "At emotions, at vulnerability, at any of the things that make marriages more than legal contracts. But I know that when you faced down those men from London, I felt pride. When you stood in this conservatory covered in dirt and exhaustion, I felt admiration. And when I watch you refuse to be broken by people who want to see you fail, I feel—" He stopped again, his jaw working. "What do you feel, Your Grace?" Eliza whispered. "Something I swore I'd never feel again after my mother died. Something I thought I'd cut out of myself along with every other weakness." He took a shaking breath. "I feel like you matter more than my carefully controlled systems. Like losing you would hurt worse than any financial loss or social scandal. Like maybe, despite every wall I've built, I'm—" "Rowan," Catherine's voice cut through the moment, sharp with urgency. "We have a problem." The Duke turned, irritation flashing across his face. "Catherine, not now." "Now," his sister insisted, her face pale. "One of the London guests just collapsed. I think she's been poisoned." The conservatory erupted into chaos. The woman, a prominent society matron, was convulsing on the floor, foam at her lips, her skin turning gray. Her husband was screaming for a doctor. Other guests were backing away in horror. And in the confusion, Eliza saw Lady Ashford slip something small and glass back into her reticule, her expression one of savage satisfaction. "She poisoned someone," Eliza breathed in horror, "to frame me, to make it look like the conservatory plants were dangerous, that I'd created a death trap." The Duke was already moving, barking orders for doctors, for magistrates, for the conservatory to be sealed. But Eliza saw how this would play out. The woman would die or survive, but either way, suspicion would fall on the Duchess who'd designed the layout, who'd selected the plants, who'd had everything to gain from silencing her critics. Lady Ashford had just turned their triumph into a potential murder investigation, and there was absolutely nothing they could do to stop it. The woman on the conservatory floor was dying. Eliza could see it in the way her body convulsed, in the gray pallor spreading across her skin like frost, in the desperate gasps that rattled from her throat. Around them, guests screamed and scrambled backward, trampling displays and knocking over specimen cases in their panic to escape what they now saw as a chamber of horrors. "Everyone out!" the Duke roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Clear the conservatory immediately!" But Eliza wasn't moving. Her eyes were locked on Lady Ashford, who had positioned herself near the entrance, her face a perfect mask of shocked concern. Too perfect. Too practiced. And that small glass vial she'd slipped into her reticule. "Rowan," Eliza said urgently, gripping his arm, "don't let Lady Ashford leave. Check her reticule. She's carrying something." The Duke's eyes snapped to Lady Ashford, then back to Eliza. "You're certain?" "I saw her put something away right before the woman collapsed. A small glass container." He didn't question further. "Thomas?" The steward appeared at his elbow. "Seal all exits. No one leaves until Magistrate Whitlock arrives. And find Lady Ashford. I want her detained for questioning." But Lady Ashford had heard him. She turned and bolted for the door, shoving through the panicked crowd with surprising strength. The Duke started after her, but Catherine was faster, stepping directly into Lady Ashford's path and planting herself like a wall. "Going somewhere?" Catherine asked sweetly. "Get out of my way, you interfering—" "I don't think so." Catherine's hand shot out and seized Lady Ashford's reticule. The older woman shrieked and tried to pull it back, but Catherine held firm. "Let's see what you're so desperate to keep hidden." The bag opened. Its contents spilled across the conservatory floor. Cosmetics, a handkerchief, calling cards, and a small glass vial half filled with clear liquid. The crowd went silent. "That's not mine," Lady Ashford said quickly, too quickly. "Someone must have planted it. In your personal reticule? While it was on your arm." The Duchess of Somerset's voice was ice. "Really, Constance, we may be fools, but we're not complete imbeciles." Magistrate Whitlock, who'd been examining the collapsed woman with the doctor who'd finally arrived, picked up the vial with a handkerchief. He uncorked it carefully and sniffed. His face went grim. "Oleander extract," he said quietly. "Highly poisonous. Causes convulsions, respiratory failure, cardiac arrest. And recently made, judging by the lack of crystallization." He looked directly at Lady Ashford. "Where did you obtain this?" I've never seen that before." "Then you won't mind if we search your London residence for similar compounds." The magistrate's tone made it clear this wasn't a question. "Or question your staff about recent purchases from apothecaries?" Lady Ashford's face had gone white. "This is absurd. I'm being framed by that scheming little—" "Careful," the Duke said, his voice deadly soft. "You're about to accuse my wife of framing you for attempted murder. I'd think very carefully about how that sounds, given that you're the one caught with poison, you're the one with clear motive to sabotage this exhibition, and you're the one who's spent weeks orchestrating attacks on our reputation. Your wife had motive too. If someone died here, it would destroy her precious conservatory, ruin her reputation." "Why would she destroy something she spent 3 weeks building?" Eliza asked, finally finding her voice. She moved closer to the collapsed woman, kneeling beside the doctor. "What plants did she touch? What did she consume?" The doctor, an elderly man with kind eyes, gestured to a nearby display. "Her husband says she was admiring those flowers. White blooms, bell-shaped. She commented on their beauty and may have brushed against them." Eliza's heart sank. "Lily of the valley. We have them in the spring display section. They're toxic if ingested, but not if merely touched. She would have had to actually eat them or—" She stopped, understanding flooding through her. "Or consume them in liquid form." She turned to the woman's husband, a portly man in his 60s who was weeping over his wife's body. "Sir, I'm so sorry, but I need to know. Did your wife drink anything before she collapsed?" The tea," he stammered. "Everyone was offered tea and refreshments when we arrived. She had a cup, said it tasted slightly bitter, but assumed it was a new blend." His voice broke. "Is she going to die?" "Not if I can help it." The doctor was already working, forcing a charcoal mixture between the woman's lips. "Lily of the valley poisoning is treatable if caught early. She'll be violently ill, but she should survive." Eliza stood, her mind racing. "The tea service. Who handled it?" Mrs. Granger stepped forward, her face pale. "We used the main service, Your Grace. The tea was prepared in the kitchen as always, and servants circulated with trays. But I supervised everything myself. There's no way anyone could have—" "Unless someone added something after it was served," Catherine interjected. She turned to the crowd. "Who was standing near Lady Hartwell when she drank her tea?" Silence. Then a young woman spoke up, her voice trembling. I saw—" She stopped, looking nervously at Lady Ashford. "I saw someone offer her a small flask, said it was brandy to cut the bitterness of the tea. Lady Hartwell laughed and accepted it, added a drop or two to her cup." "Who offered it?" the Duke demanded. I didn't see clearly. There were so many people. But it was a woman, older, well-dressed, wearing crimson." Every eye in the conservatory turned to Lady Ashford, who stood frozen in her elaborate crimson gown. "That could be anyone," Lady Ashford said desperately. "Dozens of women are wearing red today." "But only one had oleander extract in her reticule," Magistrate Whitlock said grimly. "Lady Ashford, I'm placing you under arrest for attempted murder. You have the right to—" "Wait." Eliza's voice cut through the pronouncement. "Before you arrest her, I want to understand why. Not just the general motive. We all know she wanted to destroy my reputation. But why this? Why attempted murder? Why risk everything on something so extreme?" Lady Ashford's laugh was harsh and bitter. "You want to understand? You, who came from nothing and took what should have belonged to my daughter? My beautiful, accomplished, perfectly bred daughter, who would have been an asset to the Blackthorn name instead of an embarrassment? Your daughter, the Duke said coldly, couldn't manage basic household accounts without error. She cried when I suggested she learn the estate management systems, and she made it abundantly clear that she saw marriage to me as a social prize, not a partnership. I didn't reject her. I recognized that we were fundamentally incompatible. Because you're a cold, heartless bastard who values ledgers over lineage. Lady Ashford's composure finally shattered completely. My daughter would have given you heirs with impeccable bloodlines, connections to half the noble families in England, the kind of social standing that actually matters. Instead, you chose this nobody from a bankrupt family who's convinced you that efficiency and gardening somehow compensate for inferior breeding. Inferior breeding, Eliza repeated slowly. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not my competence or my character, but the fact that my blood isn't blue enough for your standards. You were born to manage a household, not lead one, Lady Ashford spat. Every day you play at being Duchess is an insult to women who were raised for the role. And when that ridiculous contract was revealed and you still weren't ruined, when people actually seemed to accept your pathetic speech about partnership over romance, I realized you'd never leave voluntarily. You'd cling to your purchased position until you forced me out through scandals so severe the Duke would have no choice but to dissolve the marriage, Eliza finished. A death at my exhibition, poisoning traced to plants I selected, accusations that I was criminally negligent or actively malicious. It would have destroyed everything. It still might, Lady Ashford said viciously. Even attempted murder creates scandal. People will wonder why you had poisonous plants on display. They'll question your judgment, your competence. They'll see exactly what happened, the Duchess of Somerset interrupted. Her voice carried absolute authority through the conservatory. A vindictive woman so consumed by social ambition that she attempted to murder an innocent person to frame her rival. That's the scandal, Constance. Not the Duchess's plants or her management. Your desperation. Other voices rose in agreement. The tide was turning, Eliza realized. The same people who'd been ready to condemn her minutes ago were now rallying to her defense, appalled by Lady Ashford's extremism. Take her away, Magistrate Whitlock ordered, gesturing to the two constables he'd brought. And someone send word to London. This will require a full investigation. As Lady Ashford was led away, still protesting her innocence, the doctor helped Lady Hartwell to a sitting position. The woman was conscious now, though deathly pale and clearly in pain. I'm so sorry, Eliza said, kneeling beside her. This should never have happened. The conservatory is safe. I swear to you, every plant here is carefully controlled and documented. What she did, using poison to— I know it wasn't your fault, Lady Hartwell said weakly. I saw her offer me the flask. I just didn't realize— She gripped Eliza's hand with surprising strength. You saved my life. The doctor said if you hadn't identified the poison so quickly, if you hadn't known your plants well enough to narrow down the source, I would have died. You knew it was lily of the valley from symptoms alone? The doctor asked, surprised. Most people wouldn't recognize oleander poisoning that quickly. I studied every toxic plant in this conservatory extensively before allowing them on display, Eliza explained. I wanted to ensure complete safety, to know exactly what risks existed and how to mitigate them. I have documentation on every species, toxicity levels, symptoms, treatments, everything. The Duchess of Somerset smiled. So your obsessive preparation and attention to detail just saved a woman's life. How careless and incompetent of you. Scattered laughter rippled through the remaining crowd, relieved, slightly hysterical laughter, but genuine nonetheless. The tension was breaking. Your Grace, William said quietly, approaching Eliza with concern written across his weathered face. What do you want to do about the exhibition? Should we cancel? Send everyone home? Eliza looked around the conservatory. Displays were knocked over, plants trampled, the careful arrangement she'd worked weeks to perfect, destroyed by panicked guests. The whole space felt violated, tainted by what had almost happened here. But she also saw the people who'd stayed, the Duchess of Somerset, watching her with approval, the horticulturalists who were already examining the lily of the valley with professional interest, the practical landowners who were studying the irrigation system despite the chaos. These people hadn't fled. They'd stayed to see what she would do next. We continue, Eliza said firmly. Lady Ashford wanted to destroy this place, to prove it was dangerous and I was incompetent. The best response is to prove her wrong. William, can we restore the damaged displays? In an hour, maybe 2, if we move quickly. Then do it. And while you work, I'll give personal tours to anyone willing to stay. I'll explain every plant, every safety measure, every decision that went into this design. Complete transparency. No more room for doubt or fear. The Duke moved to her side. Are you certain? After what just happened, no one would blame you for what? Hiding? Giving up? Eliza turned to face him. You spent 20 years building walls to protect yourself from pain. I refuse to do the same. Yes, something terrible almost happened here, but it didn't succeed, and I won't let someone else's malice destroy what we've created. Something shifted in his expression, pride mixed with wonder, and what might have been love if she dared to name it. Then we continue. Together. The next 2 hours were exhausting. While William and his team worked frantically to restore the displays, Eliza led small groups through the conservatory, explaining everything with painstaking detail. She showed them the labeling system that identified every toxic species. She demonstrated the safety barriers that prevented accidental contact with dangerous plants. She walked them through her research process, the documentation she'd compiled, the protocols she'd established. And slowly, understanding replaced fear. People began to see the conservatory not as a death trap, but as a carefully managed collection that balanced beauty with safety. The horticulturalists were particularly impressed. This is more thorough than what we have at the Royal Botanical Gardens, one admitted, examining Eliza's documentation. We should be implementing similar systems. Your Grace, would you be willing to present these methods to the Society? Yes, of course, Eliza stammered, caught off guard. I'd be honored. Don't be too honored, the Duchess of Somerset said dryly. They'll work you half to death on committees, but it's worth it to have your expertise recognized. By late afternoon, the conservatory had been restored to something approaching its former glory. Guests who'd fled earlier began trickling back, drawn by reports of what they'd missed. Word had spread through the crowd about Lady Ashford's arrest, about Eliza's quick thinking in identifying the poison, about the Duke's fierce defense of his wife. The narrative was changing. What had begun as a potential scandal was transforming into a story of competence under pressure, of a wife and husband standing together against malicious attacks, of justice prevailing over social machination. You've done it, Catherine said quietly, finding Eliza alone for a moment in the conservatory's eastern wing. You've actually turned this disaster into a triumph. Lady Ashford nearly killed someone, Eliza said, the full weight of that settling over her. Someone nearly died because of hatred directed at me. Someone nearly died because Lady Ashford is a monster. That's not your fault. Catherine gripped her shoulders. And more importantly, everyone knows it now. The whispers, the doubts, the questions about your worthiness, they're gone. You proved yourself in the most dramatic way possible. No one will question your competence or your character again. The Duke defended me, Eliza said softly. In front of everyone, he said. She stopped, remembering his words. Something I swore I'd never feel again, like losing you would hurt worse than any financial loss. He said he cares about you, Catherine finished, more than he's cared about anyone in 20 years. We all heard it, Eliza, including him. I think he surprised himself. What do I do with that? Whatever you want. But my advice? Don't let him retreat back into his comfortable distance now that the crisis is over. He's finally feeling things again. Don't let him hide from that. As evening fell and the last guests departed, Eliza found herself alone in the conservatory once more. The space was quiet now, peaceful, with only the gentle hum of the irrigation system and the rustle of leaves in the breeze from the opened vents. She walked slowly through the displays, checking each plant, making notes of damage that would need attention tomorrow. Her feet ached, her dress was ruined. She'd spent the day being attacked, defending herself, and nearly witnessing a murder. She should be devastated. Instead, she felt strangely light. You should be resting. The Duke's voice came from behind her. He'd removed his formal coat and rolled up his sleeves, looking more approachable than she'd ever seen him. I wanted to assess the damage, make lists for tomorrow's repairs. Of course you did. He moved to stand beside her, surveying the conservatory with the same careful attention. That's very much in character. Is it? I'm not sure I know what my character is anymore. Eliza touched a palm frond gently. 3 weeks ago, I was a spinster from a bankrupt family with no prospects and no purpose. Now I'm a duchess who's been publicly attacked, nearly framed for murder, and apparently invited to present research to the Royal Horticultural Society. I barely recognize my own life. For what it's worth, I barely recognize mine either. The Duke's hand came to rest on the display case between them, close enough to hers that their fingers nearly touched. I thought I had everything figured out. Efficient systems, clear boundaries, no emotional complications. And then you arrived and destroyed every assumption I'd built my life around. I'm sorry? Don't be. They needed destroying. He turned to face her fully. Eliza, earlier today, before everything went catastrophically wrong, I was trying to tell you something I've been avoiding acknowledging even to myself. Her heart began to pound. Yes? I said our marriage was a transaction, that I bought you to solve a problem, and that was true when we started. His winter blue eyes held hers with unexpected intensity. But it's not true anymore. At some point in the last 3 weeks, you stopped being a solution and became... He struggled for words, his usual cold articulation failing him. Became what? Eliza prompted gently. Essential. Irreplaceable. The most important person in my carefully ordered world. He took a shaking breath. When I thought Lady Ashford might destroy you, when I saw what she was willing to do to drive you away, I realized that losing you would devastate me in ways I haven't been devastated since my mother died. And that terrifies me. Eliza's throat tightened. Why does it terrify you? Because I swore I'd never care that much again. Caring that much about my mother, depending on her presence, believing she'd always be there, and then losing her so suddenly, it nearly broke me. I rebuilt myself by cutting away the capacity to feel that kind of attachment, by making everything transactional and controllable. His voice dropped. But you're not transactional or controllable. You're fierce and brilliant, and you've somehow made me feel things I promised myself I'd never feel again. What things? Eliza whispered. Hope. Joy. The belief that maybe, just maybe, life can be more than efficient management of responsibilities. He reached out hesitantly, his fingers brushing her cheek. The possibility that I might deserve happiness instead of just duty. Eliza leaned into his touch. You do deserve happiness. You've carried this estate, all these people, for 20 years. You've sacrificed everything to duty and efficiency. You deserve to have something for yourself. I want that something to be you, he said quietly, not as a purchase solution or a household manager, as my wife, my partner, the person I trust most in the world, if that's something you might want as well. For answer, Eliza closed the distance between them and kissed him. Not the cold, formal, oppressive lips from their wedding, but a real kiss, warm and desperate, and filled with 3 weeks of growing connection neither of them had been willing to name. He responded immediately, his arms coming around her waist, pulling her closer. His kiss was hungry, almost desperate, like a man who'd been starving and finally allowed to feast. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I've spent so long being the Duke, being the responsible one, being nothing but duty and control. I don't remember how to just be a man who cares about someone. Then we'll learn together, Eliza said. I don't know how to be a duchess. Not really. I'm making it up as I go, trying not to destroy everything through sheer inexperience. But we can figure it out together. Partnership, remember? That's what we promised each other. Partnership, he repeated, and this time when he smiled, it was genuine and unguarded. I'm going to hold you to that. They stood there in the conservatory's gentle light, holding each other, while around them the plants they'd saved together thrived in carefully maintained microclimates. Outside, the sun was setting over the estate, painting the gardens in shades of gold and amber. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Thomas appeared, looking apologetic. Your Grace, sorry to disturb, but Magistrate Whitlock has returned with news about Lady Ashford. They separated reluctantly, both of them professional once more. "What news?" the Duke asked. "They searched her London residence, found extensive documentation of her campaign against you, letters to the men who brought the false debt claims, records of payments to servants who spread rumors, even drafts of accusations she'd planned to make public." Thomas's expression was grim. "And they found 3 more vials of oleander extract in her private study, along with notes about which plants in various conservatories were toxic enough to use for her purposes." Eliza felt cold wash through her. She was planning this for weeks. The poisoning wasn't a desperate last resort. It was always her endgame. "It appears so, Your Grace, that the magistrate says the evidence is overwhelming. She'll face trial for attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy, likely spend years in prison if convicted." "Good," the Duke said flatly. "Let her face the consequences of her actions. Is there anything else?" "Yes, the Duchess of Somerset asked me to relay a message. She's organizing a formal dinner in London next month to celebrate the conservatory's opening and to publicly acknowledge Your Grace's accomplishments. She's expecting attendance from everyone who matters in society." Thomas permitted himself a small smile. "I believe her exact words were, 'Anyone who refuses the invitation will answer to me, and I'm significantly more frightening than Lady Ashford ever was.'" Catherine, who'd appeared behind Thomas, laughed. "Oh, this is perfect. A command performance where everyone has to acknowledge Eliza's success or face social exile. The Duchess of Somerset doesn't do anything by half measures." "Should we accept?" Eliza asked the Duke. "We should. It's an opportunity to solidify your position, to make it clear that you're not just accepted, but celebrated." He squeezed her hand. "Besides, I think it's time London society saw us as we actually are, partners who've built something remarkable together." After Thomas and Catherine left, the Duke led Eliza to the conservatory's central sitting area, a small space with wrought iron benches surrounded by flowering vines. They sat together in the gathering darkness, and for the first time since their wedding, the silence between them felt companionable rather than strained. "Tell me about your mother," Eliza said softly. "What was she like?" The Duke was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Fierce, intelligent. She saw potential in things others overlooked. Dying plants, struggling tenants, even my father when he was at his worst. She believed everything could be saved with enough patience and care." "Like someone else I know," Eliza said. He smiled slightly. "The resemblance hasn't escaped me. When I watch you work, when I see the way you approach challenges, I'm reminded so much of her that it's almost painful. But it's a good pain, if that makes sense. Like remembering what it felt like to be loved." "You are loved," Eliza said firmly. "Catherine adores you, even when she's exasperated with you. Your staff respects and cares for you. I've seen how they worry when you work too hard. Your tenants trust you completely, and I—" She stopped, gathering courage. "I'm falling in love with you, the real you, not the Duke or the distant aristocrat, but the man who designed irrigation systems at 17 and still remembers every detail 20 years later. The man who works alongside his tenants during crises and knows every family by name. The man who's trying so hard to let someone in despite how much it terrifies him." His breath caught. "Eliza, you don't have to say it back. I know you're not ready, might never be ready, but I wanted you to know. You deserve to know that you're loved for who you actually are, not what you can provide, or how perfectly you manage things." The Duke pulled her closer, his arms solid around her. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I don't know if I'm capable of loving the way you deserve, but I know that when I'm with you, I feel more alive than I have in 20 years. That counts for something, doesn't it?" "It counts for everything," Eliza assured him. They sat there as full darkness fell, watching the conservatory's plants transform into shadowy shapes illuminated by moonlight through glass. Tomorrow they would face more challenges: the aftermath of Lady Ashford's arrest, preparations for the London dinner, the ongoing work of managing the estate. But tonight, they simply sat together, two people who'd started as a transaction and become something infinitely more valuable. The conservatory around them stood as proof that beautiful things could be saved, that careful attention and passionate commitment could restore what seemed beyond hope. And if a conservatory could be brought back to life, Eliza thought, Then perhaps so could the carefully guarded heart of the man beside her. Perhaps so could they both. The month that followed passed in a blur of restoration and revelation. The conservatory's damaged displays were repaired, then improved upon. The orders for exotic plant specimens increased daily as word spread about the collection's quality and the dramatic events of the exhibition. Within 2 weeks, the conservatory had generated more revenue than the Duke's most optimistic projections. But it was the quieter changes that mattered most to Eliza. The Duke began taking meals with her instead of hiding in his study. He sought her opinion on estate matters, genuinely listening to her suggestions. And some nights, after the household had settled, he would find her in the conservatory or the gardens, and they would walk together in comfortable silence, his hand finding hers as naturally as breathing. They were learning each other, slowly, carefully, like cartographers mapping unknown territory. "You hum when you're working on something complicated," he observed one evening, watching her review household accounts in her study. "You tap your left index finger when you're thinking through a difficult decision," she countered. 3 taps for minor issues, 5 or more for major ones. He looked down at his hand, startled. "I had no idea I did that." "You do a lot of things you're not aware of, like the way you soften your voice when you talk to the younger servants, or how you always check the western fields first during your morning rides, because you're worried about drainage issues no one else has noticed yet." She set down her pen. "You care deeply about everything here, even when you pretend it's just efficient management." He was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "You see too much. I see what you don't want to hide anymore." Eliza rose and moved to where he stood by the window. "You're allowed to care, Rowan. You're allowed to admit that this place is more than a business to you." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone in a gesture that had become familiar. "You've changed everything, you know. I can't remember what it was like before you arrived and turned my ordered world into chaos. Good chaos or bad chaos?" "The best kind of chaos," he said softly, and kissed her. They were interrupted by Catherine's sharp knock. "Sorry to disturb the domestic bliss, but the invitations for the London dinner arrived. You need to see the guest list." The Duchess of Somerset's dinner was scheduled for the first Saturday in November at her magnificent townhouse in Mayfair. The guest list read like a directory of everyone who mattered in English society: dukes and earls, members of parliament, wealthy merchants, influential artists and scholars, even foreign dignitaries. 200 of the most powerful people in England, all summoned to witness and acknowledge the Duke of Blackthorn's unconventional marriage. "This is either going to be our greatest triumph or our most spectacular public humiliation," Catherine said cheerfully. "No pressure." Eliza studied the names, her stomach churning with anxiety. "Half these people probably sided with Lady Ashford before her arrest. They'll be looking for any excuse to tear me apart." "Then we make sure they can't find one," the Duke said firmly. "We prepare thoroughly, present a united front, and demonstrate exactly what we've accomplished. Facts over gossip, results over rumors." "You make it sound simple." "It is simple. Difficult, but simple." He took her hand. "We tell the truth. We show them what we've built together, and we refuse to apologize for choosing partnership over performance." The days before the dinner were consumed with preparation. Eliza worked with Catherine to select the perfect gown. Elegant, but not ostentatious, fashionable, but not frivolous. She practiced conversations, rehearsed responses to potential criticisms, studied the backgrounds of key guests until she could recite their family histories and business interests from memory. The Duke, meanwhile, prepared documentation. Financial records showing the estate's increased profitability, letters from satisfied plant collectors, testimonials from tenants about improved conditions, a formal report from the Royal Horticultural Society praising the conservatory's safety protocols and educational value. "You're building a legal case," Eliza observed, finding him buried in papers in his study 3 days before the dinner. "I'm building an irrefutable argument. If anyone questions your competence or our marriage, I want overwhelming evidence ready to deploy." He looked up, and she saw the fierce protectiveness in his eyes. "I won't let them hurt you, Eliza. Not with whispers, not with social games, not with anything. You've proven yourself 1,000 times over. It's time they acknowledged it." The night before they were to depart for London, Eliza couldn't sleep. She found herself in the conservatory again, drawn to the space that had become her sanctuary. The plants rustled softly in the breeze from the ventilation system, and moonlight painted everything in silver and shadow. She was examining a rare orchid that had just begun to bloom when she heard footsteps behind her. "Can't sleep either?" the Duke asked. "Too many thoughts." Eliza touched the orchid's delicate petals. "This one is from Ceylon. William says it almost never blooms in England. The climate is too different, but we created the right conditions here. Warmth, humidity, careful attention. And now look at it, thriving in a place it should never have survived." "Are we still talking about the orchid?" he asked gently. Eliza smiled. "Maybe not. I keep thinking about how impossible this all seemed a month ago. The conservatory was dead. The estate was frozen in your careful control. I was a desperate woman selling herself for security. Nothing about any of this should have worked. But it did work. We made it work." "Did we? Or are we about to walk into a London drawing room and discover that society will never accept what we've become?" She turned to face him. "They'll see you as a duke who lowered himself by marrying damaged goods. They'll see me as an opportunist who got lucky. No matter what evidence we present, some people will never believe we're anything more than the transaction we started as." The Duke moved closer, his hand settling on her shoulders. "Then those people are fools who can't recognize transformation when it's standing in front of them. Eliza, look at what we've accomplished. This conservatory, these gardens, the household improvements, the tenant reforms, every single change made this estate better. And the most important change wasn't to the buildings or the land, it was to us." "How so?" "I was a man who'd convinced himself that efficiency could substitute for humanity, that control could replace connection, that if I just managed everything perfectly, I'd never have to risk being hurt again." His voice roughened. "You showed me that was cowardice, not strength. Real strength is letting someone in despite the risk. Real courage is choosing to care about something even when you might lose it." Eliza's throat tightened. "I was terrified when I married you, convinced I'd spend the rest of my life as a ghost in a beautiful prison, managing your household while slowly dying inside. I thought survival would be enough. And now? Now I want more than survival. I want partnership, passion, purpose. I want to build things that matter with someone who sees me as an equal. I want—" She stopped, gathering courage. "I want to be loved for who I am, not what I provide. And I want to love someone without fear that they'll leave me the moment I become inconvenient." "You have all of that," he said quietly. "You've had it for weeks, even when I was too afraid to say it out loud. Eliza, I love you. Not because you're efficient or competent, or because you've increased estate revenue. I love you because you're fierce and brilliant, and you refuse to be diminished by circumstances that would destroy lesser people. I love you because you saw potential in a dying conservatory and in a half-dead duke, and you fought to restore both of us." Tears spilled down Eliza's cheeks. "Say it again." "I love you." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I love you, and tomorrow when we walk into that dinner, I want everyone to see it. No more hiding behind professionalism or pretending this is just a practical arrangement. I want them to know you're my wife, my partner, and the best decision I've ever made. That's going to scandalize people." "Good. Let them be scandalized. I'm done caring what they think." He pulled her closer. "The only opinion that matters to me is yours. So tell me, do you want to go to London and prove ourselves to society? Or do we say to hell with their approval and just live our lives?" Eliza considered. Part of her wanted to stay here, safe in their conservatory, away from judgment and scrutiny. But a larger part, the part that had survived bankruptcy and social rejection and a cold wedding night, refused to hide. "We go," she said firmly. "We show them exactly what we've built, and we make them acknowledge it. Not because we need their approval, but because other women need to see that unconventional marriages can succeed. That partnerships based on respect can be stronger than romance based on fantasy. That you can start as a transaction and become something real." He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "Then we go to London. Together." The journey to London took a full day of travel. They stayed overnight at an inn halfway, then continued to the Duke's townhouse in the city, an elegant building in Belgravia that Eliza had never seen before. It was smaller than Blackthorn Manor, but beautifully appointed, with the same careful attention to quality that characterized everything the Duke managed. "I haven't been here in 2 years," he admitted as they entered. "I prefer the country, but Catherine maintains it for family use." Catherine had traveled ahead to ensure everything was prepared. She greeted them at the door with her usual energy. "Good, you're here. Eliza, your gown is upstairs. I've also assembled intelligence on everyone who's likely to attend tomorrow. You need to know who's an ally, who's neutral, and who's actively hostile." For the next several hours, Catherine briefed them like a general preparing for battle. She'd catalogued every guest, identified their connections to Lady Ashford, assessed their likely positions on the Duke's marriage, and even prepared suggested conversation topics for key individuals. "Lord Pemberton will be there," she said. "He wasn't arrested with the others because he cooperated with the investigation, but he's still humiliated by the whole affair. Don't engage with him directly. He might try to salvage his reputation by attacking yours." "Sir James Hawthorne?" "Also attending, also hostile. Same strategy. Avoid direct confrontation. Don't give him ammunition." Catherine consulted her notes. "Your allies include the Duchess of Somerset, obviously. Also, Lord and Lady Hertford. Their daughter is one of the conservatory's best customers, and Lady Hertford has been singing your praises to everyone who'll listen. The Duke of Pemberton is neutral but fair-minded. If you can win him over, others will follow." The Duke listened to all this with increasing tension. "This sounds like warfare." "Because it is warfare," Catherine said bluntly. "Social warfare, which is the most vicious kind because there are no clear rules and the weapons are all invisible. But Eliza can win this. She's already won every battle that mattered. She just needs to claim the victory publicly." That night, Eliza lay awake in the unfamiliar London bedroom, the Duke beside her. They'd begun sharing chambers 2 weeks earlier, a gradual shift that felt natural despite how recently they'd been strangers. Now she couldn't imagine sleeping without his steady breathing beside her, his warmth a constant reassurance in the darkness. "Are you afraid?" he asked quietly. "Terrified. You?" "Beyond terrified. I've faced financial ruin, estate emergencies, even physical danger. But walking into a room full of people who want to see us fail? That's a different kind of threat." Eliza rolled to face him. "We could leave. Right now. Go back to Blackthorn and forget about London society entirely." "Could we? Really?" He traced patterns on her shoulder. "Or would we spend the rest of our lives wondering if we were hiding because we were smart or because we were cowards?" "Probably the latter," Eliza admitted. "Then we go. And whatever happens, we face it together." He kissed her, slow and deep. "I'd face anything with you beside me." The Duchess of Somerset's townhouse blazed with light, visible from 3 streets away. Carriages lined the square, footmen in elaborate livery helping guests alight, the cream of London society ascending the marble steps in glittering procession. Eliza watched from their carriage window, her stomach churning with nerves. "Ready?" the Duke asked, offering his hand. "No, but let's go anyway." They were announced at the entrance to the grand ballroom, the Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn, and conversation stopped as 200 heads turned to assess them. Eliza felt the weight of their scrutiny like a physical pressure. Her gown was perfect, her hair elegantly arranged, her posture impeccable. But inside she was the same desperate woman who'd married for security, and she was certain everyone could see it. Then the Duchess of Somerset swept forward, magnificent in purple silk, her voice carrying through the sudden silence. "Your Graces? Finally! I've been telling everyone about your remarkable conservatory, but words hardly do it justice. Come, you must meet the ambassador from France. He's desperately interested in acquiring specimens for the royal gardens." It was a brilliant tactical move, Eliza realized. By immediately positioning them with foreign dignitaries, the Duchess was elevating their status, making it clear that anyone who wanted to attack them would have to do so in front of international witnesses. The French ambassador was indeed interested in the conservatory, asking detailed questions about cultivation methods and expressing amazement at what had been accomplished. "Most impressive, Your Grace," he said to Eliza in accented English. "In France, we pride ourselves on our gardens, but this innovation with controlled climates, très remarquable. You have training in horticulture?" "No, Your Excellency, just careful observation and willingness to learn from experts." Ah, but that is the best training, to see with fresh eyes, yes? He turned to the Duke. You are fortunate in your wife, Your Grace. Beauty and intelligence together, very rare. Other conversations followed, each carefully orchestrated by the Duchess of Somerset and Catherine working in tandem. They introduced Eliza to scholars, plant collectors, progressive landowners, people who cared about results rather than pedigree. And with each interaction, Eliza felt her confidence growing. These people weren't judging her background, they were interested in her work. But the hostile faction was present too, circulating at the edges, waiting for an opportunity. Eliza saw Sir James Hawthorne whispering to a group of stern-faced matrons. Lord Pemberton stood near the refreshment table, his expression sour as he watched the Duke and Duchess receive positive attention. An hour into the evening, the attack came. Lady Marchmont, a formidable dowager known for her conservative views and vicious tongue, approached with predatory grace. Duchess Blackthorne, how novel to see someone from your background in such exalted company. Tell me, is it true your family's estate had to be sold to satisfy creditors? I can't imagine how that must feel. The nearby conversations quieted. This was it, the public challenge they'd been expecting. Eliza met Lady Marchmont's eyes steadily. It felt like failure, my lady, like watching everything my family built for generations crumble because of poor decisions and worse luck. It was humiliating and painful, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. Lady Marchmont smiled, sensing blood. And yet here you are, married to one of England's wealthiest dukes. How very fortunate. Very fortunate indeed, Eliza agreed, though I'd argue the Duke was equally fortunate in securing a wife willing to actually work instead of simply decorating his estates. Work? Lady Marchmont's tone dripped with disdain. You mean presuming to reorganize systems that functioned perfectly well before your arrival? I mean identifying inefficiencies, implementing improvements, and generating measurable results. Eliza kept her voice calm, factual. Household costs are down 14%. Estate revenue from the conservatory alone has exceeded projections by 40%. Tenant satisfaction has increased significantly. Those aren't presumptions, Lady Marchmont. Those are achievements. Achievements that any competent household manager could claim. Then why didn't the previous arrangements achieve them? The Duke interrupted, his voice cold. Lady Marchmont, you're attempting to diminish my wife's accomplishments by suggesting they're commonplace. But the truth is, in 20 years of managing Blackthorne, I never achieved the level of improvement she's generated in 5 weeks. That's not because I'm incompetent. It's because she brought fresh perspective, innovative thinking, and the courage to challenge established methods. Those are qualities I value far more than pedigree or social connections. Lady Marchmont's face flushed. Your Grace, surely you're not suggesting that breeding and background don't matter. I'm suggesting they matter far less than character and capability. He moved to stand beside Eliza, his hand finding hers. My wife came from a bankrupt family. She married me in what was explicitly a financial arrangement. These facts don't shame her. They demonstrate her pragmatism and courage. And what she's done since that marriage demonstrates her brilliance. But the scandal. What scandal? The Duchess of Somerset's voice cut through the tension like a blade. The scandal of a capable woman improving her circumstances through marriage? That's called intelligence, not scandal. Or perhaps you mean the scandal of a duke choosing competence over connections? That's called wisdom. The only scandal I see here, Constance, is your apparent belief that women should be decorative rather than useful. Other voices rose in agreement. Lady Hertford stepped forward. My daughter has spent £200 on specimens from the Blackthorne Conservatory, and every plant has thrived. That's not scandal. That's exceptional business management. A prominent landowner added, I've implemented several of the Duchess's household efficiency methods on my own estates. Saved me thousands of pounds. If that's what comes from unconventional marriages, I'd call it a revolution worth supporting. The tide was turning. Eliza could see it in the faces around them. Surprise shifting to consideration, hostility giving way to grudging respect. Lady Marchmont and her allies were losing ground, but Lord Pemberton made one last attempt. All very impressive, I'm sure. But let's not forget the circumstances of the exhibition. A woman nearly died from poisoning at an event the Duchess organized. That hardly speaks to competent management. The room went silent again. This was the most dangerous accusation, the one that could actually damage their reputation if not handled perfectly. Eliza took a breath and stepped forward. "You're absolutely right, Lord Pemberton. A woman nearly died at my exhibition, and that's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. But let's be precise about what actually happened." She turned to address the full room, projecting her voice clearly. "Lady Ashford, motivated by hatred and social ambition, brought poison to my exhibition with the explicit intent to murder someone and frame me. She succeeded in poisoning Lady Hartwell and very nearly succeeded in destroying my reputation. The only reason she failed is because I'd studied every toxic plant in that conservatory so thoroughly that I could identify the specific poison within minutes and direct treatment that saved Lady Hartwell's life. Lord Pemberton, you were part of Lady Ashford's initial attack on my marriage," she continued, watching him pale. "You brought fabricated debt claims designed to create scandal. You participated in a conspiracy to destroy my husband's reputation because someone paid you to do so. And now you have the audacity to stand here and suggest that I'm responsible for Lady Ashford's criminal actions? That's not... I was cleared of wrongdoing. You were cleared because you cooperated with the investigation after being caught. But you still participated in fraud. You still tried to destroy an innocent man's reputation for profit." Eliza's voice was steady, relentless. "So before you question my competence or judgment, perhaps examine your own choices. Because from where I'm standing, you have no moral authority to criticize anyone." The room erupted. Shocked gasps, scattered applause, furious whispers. Lord Pemberton looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The Duke moved to Eliza's side. "My wife is being diplomatic. I'm not. Lord Pemberton, Sir James Hawthorne, and anyone else who participated in Lady Ashford's campaign, you attempted to destroy my marriage and my reputation through fraud and conspiracy. You failed. And now you have two choices: accept that failure with grace or continue this vendetta and face legal consequences for your actions." "We could pursue damages," Catherine added helpfully from the crowd. "The financial harm caused by those false debt claims was substantial. I'm sure our solicitors would be delighted to calculate exact figures." Sir James Hawthorne stepped forward, his face carefully neutral. "Your Grace, Duchess, I believe we all recognize that certain errors in judgment were made. Perhaps it's time to move forward rather than dwelling on past misunderstandings." "Misunderstandings," the Duke repeated flatly. "Is that what we're calling attempted fraud now?" "I think what Sir James means," the Duchess of Somerset interjected smoothly, "is that everyone has learned valuable lessons from this unfortunate affair. Lady Ashford's arrest demonstrated the consequences of letting social prejudice override basic decency, and perhaps tonight has demonstrated that intelligence and capability matter more than bloodlines and connections. Wouldn't you agree, Constance?" Lady Marchmont looked trapped. Finally, grudgingly, she nodded. "The Duchess has certainly proven herself more capable than many expected." It wasn't a ringing endorsement, but it was surrender. Eliza felt something unclench in her chest. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations, introductions, and carefully orchestrated social maneuvering. The Duchess of Somerset ensured that Eliza met every influential person in attendance, each interaction reinforcing her legitimacy and competence. By the time dinner was announced, the hostile faction had retreated to the periphery, their attacks blunted by overwhelming evidence and social pressure. Dinner itself was a triumph. Eliza was seated between the French ambassador and the Duke of Pemberton, both of whom spent the meal asking detailed questions about estate management and conservation methods. The Duke sat across from her, catching her eye periodically with expressions of pride and relief. After dinner, as guests gathered for dancing and cards, the Duchess of Somerset pulled Eliza aside. "Well done, my dear. You handled that beautifully. I nearly fell apart when Lady Marchmont attacked. But you didn't fall apart. You stood firm, presented facts, and refused to be diminished. That's precisely what was needed." The older woman studied her appraisingly. "You know, when Rowan first announced his marriage, I thought he'd made another practical miscalculation. But I was wrong. You're exactly what he needed. Someone strong enough to break through his walls and smart enough to rebuild what he'd let die. I just saw potential and tried to restore it. No, you saw a man worth saving and fought to save him, even when he was fighting against being saved." The Duchess smiled. "That's love, my dear. Real love." not the romantic delusion most of these people mistake for the genuine article. You and Rowan have built something rare and valuable. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. As the evening drew to a close and guests began departing, Eliza found herself on the terrace, looking out over the London night. The Duke joined her, slipping his arm around her waist. "We survived," he said. "We did more than survive. We won." Eliza leaned into him. "Did you see Lord Pemberton's face when I called out his participation in the fraud? I thought he might actually faint." "You were magnificent, terrifying, but magnificent." He kissed her temple. "I'm sorry you had to defend yourself like that. You shouldn't have to justify your worth to people who aren't qualified to judge you. Neither should you, but we do it anyway because that's what's required to claim our space in this world." She turned to face him. "The question is whether it was worth it. All the preparation, the stress, the performance. Did we actually accomplish anything? We proved that we're partners, not a scandal. We demonstrated that unconventional marriages can succeed. We showed that capability matters more than pedigree." He cupped her face in his hands. "And we stood together against people who wanted to tear us apart. I'd call that worth it." "What happens now?" "Now we go home to Blackthorn. We continue the work we've started. We build the life we want instead of the one society expects." His smile was soft. "And we love each other without fear or reservation, because we've earned that right." They returned to Blackthorn 3 days later, the London triumph settling into satisfying memory. But Eliza noticed changes immediately. The staff greeted them with genuine warmth rather than careful deference. Letters had arrived from London plant collectors, scholars, and even other estates requesting consultations on conservation and household management. The conservatory had received commissions for specimens worth over £1,000, but the most significant change was in the Duke himself. The walls he'd maintained so carefully for 20 years had finally come down. He worked alongside Eliza in the conservatory, laughed with the staff, even joined Catherine for informal dinners without retreating to his study afterward. He was learning to live instead of just manage. One evening, 2 weeks after their return, Eliza found him in the conservatory examining the orchids that had bloomed in their absence. More buds had opened, creating a cascade of exotic color. "Beautiful," she said, moving to stand beside him. "I was just thinking about the first time I built this irrigation system. I was so certain I could control everything: water flow, temperature, humidity, every variable precisely managed. And I convinced myself that if I could just perfect the system, my mother would never have to worry about her plants again. That control could prevent loss. But she died anyway." "She did. And I spent 20 years believing that proved my failure, that if I'd been more careful, more controlled, more perfect, I could have prevented it. So I applied that logic to everything: control every variable, eliminate every risk, never let anything matter enough to hurt me." He touched one of the blooms gently. "But you can't actually live that way. You can survive, but you can't live. And these plants proved it." "How so?" "Because they're thriving not because of perfect control, but because we created conditions that allow for growth. We balance structure with flexibility, planning with adaptation. We care for them without trying to dominate them." He turned to face her. "That's what you've taught me, that real strength isn't about control. It's about having the courage to care despite the risk." Eliza's throat tightened. "You're a different man than the one I married." "I'm the man I was always meant to be, before grief and fear convinced me otherwise. You didn't change me, Eliza. You helped me remember who I was before I built all these walls." "And who was that?" "Someone who believed beautiful things were worth fighting for. Someone who thought efficiency and humanity could coexist. Someone capable of love." He pulled her close. "Someone very much like you." 3 months later, Eliza stood in the conservatory on a bitter January morning, reviewing plans for spring planting with William. The elderly gardener had become not just a colleague, but a friend, someone who understood her passion for the work and shared her vision for what the estate could become. "We could expand the tropical section here," he said, pointing to a cleared area. "And I've been thinking about adding a dedicated orchid house, separate structure, even more precise climate control. The demand for orchids is extraordinary right now. Could we manage that financially?" "With current revenue? Easily. In fact, we're generating enough profit to fund expansion and still contribute substantially to the estate's overall income. William smiled. You've built something remarkable here, Your Grace. This conservatory is becoming known throughout England. We've had inquiries from as far as Scotland about specimens and consulting. The Duke entered, brushing snow from his coat. Am I interrupting? Just planning world domination through superior horticulture, Eliza said. The usual. Of course, I'll leave you to it. But he paused, an unusual expression on his face. Actually, there's something I wanted to show you both. In the East Gardens. They followed him outside into the biting cold. The gardens were dormant now, sleeping under a blanket of snow. But the Duke led them to a section that had been neglected for years, overgrown, wild, forgotten. I've been thinking, he said, his breath misting in the cold air. This section was my mother's favorite. She always planned to create a winter garden here. Plants that bloom in snow, evergreens, structures that look beautiful year-round. But she died before she could start, and I let it die with her. He turned to Eliza. I want to build it now. Not as a memorial to what was lost, but as a celebration of what we've found. A garden that proves beautiful things can survive even the harshest conditions, if they're given the right care and attention. Eliza's eyes filled with tears. Rowan, William, I'll need your expertise on plant selection. Eliza, I'll need your design sense and project management. And Catherine, he glanced at his sister who'd followed them out. I'll need you to keep us from killing each other when we inevitably disagree on details. Catherine laughed. Finally, a project I'm suited for. They spent the rest of the winter planning the garden, working together through long evenings in the Duke's study. It became a family project, with everyone contributing ideas. Catherine designed a central pavilion. William sourced rare winter-blooming plants from across Europe. Eliza created the layout, balancing beauty with practicality. And through it all, Eliza watched the Duke transform further. He laughed more freely. He shared stories about his mother without pain darkening his eyes. He talked about the future with excitement rather than grim duty. One night, after Catherine had left and William had gone to his cottage, Eliza and the Duke remained in the study, reviewing the latest plans. Snow fell beyond the windows, coating the world in pristine white. This garden is going to be spectacular, Eliza said, studying William's plant sketches. Your mother would have loved it. I think she would have loved you, the Duke said quietly. She always said I needed someone who'd challenge me instead of just agreeing with everything I said. Someone strong enough to stand up to me when I was being unreasonable. I do that a lot, don't I? Constantly, it's one of your best qualities. He set aside the papers and pulled her into his lap. Eliza, when we married, I thought I was purchasing a solution to a problem, a capable manager who could handle household matters while I focused on the estate. I remember. You made that abundantly clear. I was a fool, an arrogant, short-sighted fool who nearly destroyed the best thing that ever happened to him through sheer stubbornness. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. You weren't a solution. You were a revolution. You walked into my carefully controlled world and showed me that everything I thought I knew about strength and survival was wrong. I just refused to live in a mausoleum. You refused to let me live in one either. Even when I fought you, even when I retreated into silence and distance, you kept pushing, kept believing that something better was possible. His voice roughened. You saved me, Eliza. Not from financial ruin or social scandal, but from a living death of my own creation. You gave me back my life. Eliza kissed him, slow and sweet. You saved me too. From a future of being overlooked and undervalued. From believing my only worth was what I could provide others. You saw me, really saw me, and you made space for me to become more than I ever imagined. We saved each other. We did. And now we get to build something neither of us could have built alone. Spring came early that year, arriving in March with warmth that melted the snow and coaxed the first blooms from the winter garden. The structure was magnificent, stone pavilion at the center, winding paths through carefully selected plants, a small reflecting pool that would mirror the sky in summer. It was still incomplete, still growing, but already beautiful. The Duke and Duchess walked through it together one mild April evening, inspecting the new growth. Catherine had invited guests for a small garden party the following week. Nothing like the massive exhibition, just close friends and allies who'd supported them through the difficult months. "Are you nervous about the party?" the Duke asked. "Not anymore. We've proven ourselves a dozen times over. Anyone who attends will be there because they genuinely support us, not because they're looking for scandal." Eliza squeezed his hand. "Besides, I have you beside me. I can face anything with you beside me." The feeling is mutual. He stopped in the pavilion's center, pulling her into his arms. "I love you, Eliza Blackthorne. More than efficiency, more than control, more than any of the things I used to believe mattered most. You're the center of my world now, and I wouldn't have it any other way." "I love you too, and I'm grateful every day that you were desperate enough to marry a woman from a bankrupt family." He laughed. "I'm grateful you were desperate enough to marry a cold, controlling duke who didn't deserve you. You deserved me. You just didn't know it yet." She kissed him as the setting sun painted the garden in gold and amber. "But you know it now." The garden party was perfect. 50 guests, all genuine friends, gathered to celebrate the winter garden's completion. The Duchess of Somerset praised the design. The French ambassador commissioned a similar structure for his country estate. Plant collectors examined the specimens with professional appreciation. But the moment Eliza treasured most came at sunset, when the Duke called for everyone's attention. "Thank you all for joining us today," he said, his voice carrying across the garden. "A year ago, I married my wife in what was explicitly a practical arrangement. I needed a capable household manager. She needed security. There was no romance, no illusion of love, just a clear exchange of value." The guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure where this was going. "I'm telling you this because I want you to understand how wrong I was. I thought I could reduce marriage to a transaction, human connection to a contract. I thought if I controlled all the variables, I could avoid being hurt or disappointed. But my wife taught me that real partnership isn't about control or protection from pain. It's about being vulnerable enough to let someone in, brave enough to build something together, and wise enough to recognize that what you create together is more valuable than anything you could achieve alone." He turned to Eliza, taking her hands. "You challenged everything I believed about myself in this estate. You refused to accept my limitations or live within the boundaries I'd drawn. You saw potential where I saw only risk, and you fought to restore beauty I'd given up on. And in the process, you restored me." Tears streamed down Eliza's face. The Duke's eyes were bright as well as he continued. "I love you, Eliza, not as a convenient solution or a capable manager, but as my partner, my equal, and the person who makes every day worth living. This garden, this estate, this life we're building, none of it means anything without you at the center of it." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a ring. Not the heavy garnet from their wedding, but a delicate band set with emeralds and diamonds that caught the fading light. "I gave you a wedding ring as part of a contract. I'd like to give you this ring as a promise that every day forward, I'll choose you. I'll stand beside you. I'll love you without reservation or fear. Will you accept it?" Eliza could barely speak through her tears. "Yes. Always yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and the garden erupted in applause. Catherine was crying openly. The Duchess of Somerset was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Even stern old William looked misty. As the sun set completely and lanterns were lit throughout the garden, the party transformed into celebration. Music played, champagne flowed, and Eliza found herself dancing with her husband under the stars, surrounded by the beauty they'd created together. "Happy?" he murmured against her hair. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she answered honestly. "When I married you, I thought the best I could hope for was survival. Instead, I found a partnership that's made me more than I was alone. I found purpose, passion, and love I didn't know I was capable of experiencing. We found it together. That's the important part." He spun her gently, "And we'll keep finding it every day for the rest of our lives." Years later, when people asked about the Duke and Duchess of Blackthorne, they told different versions of the story. Some focused on the conservatory's commercial success and the revolutionary household management methods. Some emphasized the dramatic confrontation with Lady Ashford and the social triumph that followed. Some simply marveled at the gardens that had become famous throughout England. But those who knew them best understood the real story. It wasn't about business success or social vindication. It was about two broken people who found each other in desperate circumstances and chose to build something beautiful from the wreckage of their separate pasts. It was about a woman who refused to wither in a beautiful prison and a man who learned that strength meant opening yourself to love, not armoring yourself against it. It was about a marriage that began as a cold transaction and transformed into a partnership that changed everything it touched. And it was about a conservatory that proved beautiful things could be restored, even after years of neglect, if someone loved them enough to fight for them. In the end, that was the legacy of the Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn. Not just the gardens and the innovations and the business success, but the proof that love could bloom in the harshest conditions. All it required was the courage to plant seeds in frozen ground and the faith to nurture them until spring arrived.